Good evening. A call to order the September 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Louisville Planning
Recording
Commission
in progress.
with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Krantz. Commissioner Howe.
Here.
Commissioner Moline.
Here.
Commissioner Osterman. Here. Chair Brownice.
Here. Thank you. With that, a motion for this evening's agenda.
Motion to approve this evening's agenda.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And then also a motion for approval of the September 8th, 2022 minutes.
Approval of the September 8th, 2022 minutes.
And second.
Do we have any corrections or changes? No? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Do we have anybody here who would like to speak for items that are not on this evening's agenda? If you'd like to, please, welcome. If you'd start with your name and address, please.
Certainly. Good evening, Commissioners. Cynthia Korn, Musselwhite, 438 Jefferson Avenue, Louisville. One of the things I wanted to bring up is a matter of procedure for Commission to consider. Speaking to the code, so it's the role of the city manager versus the role of the planning department director in terms of presenting to the Planning Commission. And so I'll reference the code, and I just want to suggest this be a future topic for the Planning Commission, maybe with the city attorney's help, and maybe a thorough review of the municipal code, which I think reflects best practices from across the country for a city manager form of government. So first off, section 16.810 says the word shall is always mandatory and not directory. The word may is permissive. So there's a few examples of where a city manager shall present to Planning Commission. For one example, 16.12.10 says prior to a preliminary plat for preservation to the Planning Commissioner, the subdivider shall make known his intentions to the city manager. It specifically references the city manager. And then section 16.12.70 says, after reviewing the final plat to assure its acceptability, the city manager shall present the plat to the Planning Commission for review. These are shall statements, they're mandatory. Okay, so I think over the course of years, we've come out of a pandemic, right? Like, we've had fires, we've had tons of great development, but now we have EPA, severe air quality. We have water issues. I think there's a lot of reasons why, and I was starting to wonder what is happening with our planning department? Why aren't they representing the people? And I think it's like asking an architect, do you want to build that huge skyscraper? Well, of course, they always want to build huge skyscrapers. So it's not their job when they're sitting in here and presenting to you, whether it's DLO, Dakota, anything else, to be the city manager. That's not their job. So they're almost always going to say yes. And we want to be known as a city that's good to work with. So our staff, I think, is in a tough position because they build these relationships over years. They pass, all of a sudden, we don't have as much grass downtown because there's relationships with these developers. And because, oh, wow, that's a cool house. We haven't seen one like that. Let's build that one. So no fault of anyone's. This is a go forward saying, and we had an opening in our city manager role, right? But I really want to bring to the attention that we're out of compliance. The way Planning Commission is currently operating, the city manager or the acting city manager should be very involved with preliminary plats and with specifically presenting to Planning Commission final plats. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. With that then, we will I will now open the public hearing on a request for a preliminary and final plat of Red Tail Ridge. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there'll be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we will have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. After these two presentations, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, online, or by telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak, if you're in person, please fill out a comment card available at the end of the table, or if you're on telephone, if you're online, use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, table, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Do we have proper notification?
Yes, Chair Bronice, members of the commission, good evening. We do have proper notification. This was duly continued from the last meeting date. This is the second continuance, so there's no need to repost or re-notify. So the original public notification is still good for these continued hearings.
Thank you. Do any Planning Commission members have any disclosures? All right, seeing none. Your staff presentation.
Yes. Again, good evening. I'm Rob Zuccaro. I'm the Planning and Building Safety Director for the city. I will be making a brief presentation. I don't have any PowerPoint slides this evening, but thought I would go over what was submitted since the last meeting and some of the details of that, and see if there's any additional questions for staff. I do want to note that there were 2 addendums to the staff report that went out. They are posted on our website. There's paper copies up here if anybody would like to see those, but I think that we emailed those to the commission. We have the second addendum up on the dais since that went out late this afternoon, just to make sure that you have it. The first addendum had public comments. The second addendum had both public comments and staff responses to 2 commission questions. So up on the screen here is, I'm just going to kind of go through the staff report. Based on the last meeting, the commission asked a series of questions. We did receive some email questions before the packet went out. There are staff responses in here. The first was documentation related to a submittal requirement for preliminary plats where the location of natural features need to be included in the application materials. So working with the applicant, we dug up a lot of documents that I think are directly related to that submittal requirement. I'm certainly not going to go through all of them, but there are maps, there are wildlife assessments, there are tree assessments, so there's a significant amount of information in there about the land features as well. If any of the commission wants, I could bring up high-resolution aerials and those types of things as well. Just let me know. So we did provide that information. There is one regulated wetland on the property, which is the Goodhue Ditch. It is proposed to be relocated. The Army Corps of Engineers has provided a determination letter that there is no extra permitting requirements associated with the relocation of that ditch. There was a commissioner request to understand a little bit more about alternative fiscal scenarios where development doesn't take place as aggressively. We often do this when we do the fiscal model runs, where we'll do what we call a high and a low is generally 80% of the high. We adjust the amount of overall development over a 20-year period. We adjust land values, structure, construction values, and those types of things. Sometimes we adjust how quickly. We didn't adjust how quickly the development would take place, just the total amount of development. So all of the assumptions we showed you here, and then we provided the high and the low. There is still a net positive fiscal impact anticipated based on the modeling and the modeling assumptions. If you want to look at the bottom here, to the left is the high, so that's full build out with all anticipated property values, land values. It does model a 430 square foot nonprofit hospital institutional use, so we did back out property taxes and construction use taxes since they would be tax exempt, and so both of these results reflect that. These are 20, this is in, this would be 17.6 million. These are in thousands of dollars. This is a 20-year total in the low, and this is an annual average over the 20 years. So we would expect an annual average of about 880,000 on average based on that low scenario run. There was a request for a more detailed staff discussion and analysis of compliance with the 2010 General Development Plan and the Planned Community Zone District Ordinance. So what we did was we pulled out each of the relevant portions of the General Development Plan. We provided some discussion, noted compliance. I think the only thing that maybe isn't completely clear is the 2010 General Development Plan called for a private road network. They're proposing a public road network. However, the 2010 General Development Plan says that there can be revisions when you get to the final stages of development on the road network. There were some questions about some of the other sections of, so let me just slow down a little bit too. So there are, the 2010 General Development Plan is really just a one-page document. Some of our general development plans, as you know, have many pages with a lot more detail. This one does not. I believe it's because they did a concurrent PUD, so there were a lot of details with that PUD that filled in the gaps. But nonetheless, this is the regulatory zoning document that is effective and valid for the property. So this is what we're using as the regulatory document. There's a density standard, which gets you to that 2.6 million approximately square feet of allowed development. There are a series of general notes. One of them talks about public land dedication, saying that 12% minimum is needed so that's basically just reflecting the code requirement of 12% minimum. One of the commission questions that's in the addendum was, does the commission have the ability to recommend beyond 12%? And I think staff's opinion is yes, you do. It does say minimum. The GDP doesn't talk about the types. Not all public land needs to be open space, and there is more than open space being proposed. There's a park property, there's trail tracks for trails, there's a public safety facility. So any public purpose, land for any public purpose can be included. So the GDP doesn't note the location or the type, it just says 12% minimum. So certainly the Planning Commission can recommend more. I suggested some design standards within the subdivision ordinance that are probably the most directly related, but it's not inclusive of all consideration for public lands. There's a permitted use table on the General Development Plan, and as well as minimum parking requirements. So what's allowed to develop there if the plat is approved are any of the uses on this permitted use table. There's also a commercial and office use standard within our ordinances, and there is a general reference to commercial uses. So anything listed in the ordinance, the zoning ordinance for commercial and office uses in the planned community zone district is also allowed. There are what we call yard and bulk requirements, so that's heights and building setbacks. And the planned community zone district ordinance says that general development plans have to be in general compliance with the underlying zoning. You can't significantly vary. And so there's a note about intended heights that was intended for the ConocoPhillips campus. And then but it notes that you can't actually go above the underlying standard. That has to be done through the PUD process. And then there are setbacks here as well. One of the topics of discussion at the last meeting and one of staff's recommendations was that they submit a complete transportation demand management plan. That was a requirement of the 2010 General Development Plan. They have submitted a more thorough transportation demand management plan. So these plans create strategies and commitments for trying to reduce the amount of vehicular traffic and especially single occupancy vehicular traffic. So they have strategies to get people to use transit and walk and bike. And so they have provided a document that staff does believe is complete. It does have the strategies that we were expecting. That does need to be formalized through the subdivision improvement agreement, and there's anticipation that the Metro District will play a formal role in that also. So staff's anticipating agreements, but as far as the requirement to submit the TDM with the final plat, staff believes that has been met. Here's a little bit more discussion because there was some more specific questions about permitted uses. Again, the subdivision plat doesn't, you don't implement uses through the subdivision plat, but it's still relevant because you want the plat to accommodate the anticipated uses. The lots need to be laid out logical, the street network needs to be laid out logically in anticipation of the uses, the traffic study, everything has assumptions about the actual land uses. And so we do have some discussion about that. There were questions about industrial uses and light industrial uses. So I did pull out some language that is kind of the standard language that we see a lot of our developments in the Colorado Tech Center following. So there was some discussion at the last meeting about whether it was pharmaceutical production or research or those types of things. There is this section of the allowed use table that I think would allow most of those types of uses that were discussed. It talks about research, development, manufacturing, fabrication, processing, and assembly. So that's pretty broad. All of those uses would be allowed. It does say scientific or technical, but it also says or other products. So as read in its meaning, it's not limited to scientific or technical products, but any type of research, development, manufacturing, fabrication, processing, or assembly. So that is an allowed use. So there was a lot of discussion about sustainability commitments. The applicant did provide what is intended to be an exhibit to the subdivision improvement agreement on their sustainability commitments. That was included in the packet. There was a commissioner request to have information on what was approved with the general development plan last year. So that was included in the addendum. So I added their sustainability commitment plan as well as the city council conditions of approval. So all of that documentation has been provided. There was a request for information related to the Northwest Parkway and US 36 interchange. So that issue is the traffic study notes that interchange fails as using that term as you would in a traffic study. The delays at the intersection reach a level that they would consider failing in the long term. So it does fail even without this development, but with the development, it fails at an earlier date. We have discussed this with Broomfield and Northwest Parkway, as well as the applicant. There are no concrete plans. It's a much more complex thing where you wouldn't expect the applicant's engineer to necessarily design the interchange, but it will, we presume, at some point need to be redesigned and capacity added. But that wasn't, there aren't specific proposals or contributions that are being proposed as part of this project. This project does, however, require other transportation improvements, of course, both within the property boundaries, but also in the surrounding transportation network that are outlined in quite a bit of detail in the rest of the materials. But there were questions about right-of-way acquisition needs and approvals from different landowners, and there's 3 of note. There's the Boulder Valley School District, there is North Metro Fire Rescue, and there's Northwest Parkway. So since the last meeting, the applicant has provided an updated resolution of support from the school district to acquire additional right-of-way for Campus Drive expansion. North Metro Fire Rescue had previously provided a letter of support. Northwest Parkway isn't quite at that point of having expressed support in writing. Staff's list of conditions include that the plat would not be able to be recorded, finalized, it wouldn't become effective until all of those right-of-way acquisitions are actually obtained. So even if this were to go through Planning Commission and City Council, if that condition stays, the plat wouldn't be effective until they actually acquire the needed right-of-way. There was a request for information on economic impact. So the comprehensive plan talks about having neutral fiscal balance, but also a positive economic impact. And so we provided some staff thoughts on economic impact, and there were questions about vacancy. So we provided the most recent city vacancy information that we have from Economic Vitality. There was a question about reviewing preliminary and final plat simultaneously. So we did review this with the city attorney, and staff believes and the city attorney believes that the Planning Commission can choose to review them simultaneously. There's no prohibition against it. And as long as all of the standards of both application types are met. And so there are
Recording in progress.
There are both documents in the packet, and staff has reviewed it against both application types. Certainly the commission should as well, and make an independent determination, of course, on if it meets both application types. And then recommendation with conditions, yes, the commission can add conditions of their recommendation. So if you are if you're making a recommendation of approval ultimately as a group, you can add conditions that would need to be met to meet any of the standards within the subdivision ordinance. So that is appropriate and allowed. There was a question about how the Paradise Lane properties that are outside of Louisville and in Boulder County, how would those be dedicated? We have had several meetings with Boulder County open space staff. Our open space staff, Boulder County open space staff, are very supportive of acquiring these properties. They do believe that there's a lot of value for both agricultural and open space uses for the properties. What we're anticipating is they would actually be deeded to the county, and then the city would hold a conservation easement over it. Doesn't have to be that way. There are other jointly owned open spaces where we both hold partial ownership. However, the most current thinking is that the preferred structure is county ownership with city conservation easement. So if you have an opinion about that, you can make a recommendation, but that's the likely path that this acquisition would take if this continues. So there's the applicant certainly can probably expand on this significantly, but I did want to add information in the staff packet about acquiring the property and the cost. I do know that when ConocoPhillips owned the property back in 2010, they owned these properties as well. The southern 20 acres were actually intended to be part of the public land dedication through the PUD process. But of course, that PUD is expired, but it was clear that they owned the Paradise Lane properties as well. The county records indicate the property was last acquired in 2020 for almost $35 million. That includes Paradise Lane properties, Red Tail Ridge boundaries within the city, and I believe the Broomfield property to the south as well. If you're familiar with that, that's all part of that acquisition, but the applicant can provide any clarification. And then, of course, the presentation was in there as well from the applicant from the last meeting. So that was everything that we provided based on all of the questions. Staff's recommendation is still in here. So I think after staff reviewed all of the same information, we haven't modified our recommendation since the last meeting. So we do have a resolution with the list of conditions from the last meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Moline?
Thank you, Director Zuccaro. I have a question about how we should ensure that commitments made by the applicant that are in, for example, the TDM. Also, I'd also like to maybe even have us consider some of the recommendations that ERO provided to the applicant about wildlife matters, and then the sustainability addendum. How would we mechanically kind of ensure that those commitments are captured in this development?
Right. I think that it needs to be in a written agreement at that
Okay,
point
yeah.
to make sure. So there will be a subdivision improvement agreement. There could
Okay.
be other development agreements. So I would suggest making a recommendation that those be reflected in a written agreement that
Okay.
becomes part of the approval. And then staff can work with the city attorney on whether that gets embedded in the SIA or a separate agreement.
Great. Thank you very much.
Additional questions for staff? Commissioner Howe?
Yeah, can you review and comment on the changes that the city could expect with the sewer lift and the sewer changes with the sewer station? Will that affect the greater city, or will that be just a change located within
Right.
this red tail
So
proposal?
so there is a sewer lift station being proposed in the southeast corner of the Red Tail property. And then that would go to our sewer treatment plant. And there would need to be an expansion of the sewer treatment plant. And there's a separate agreement being worked on that the applicant would fund the expansion of that sewer treatment plant to accommodate the development. So that agreement would require that, development capacity could not go beyond the capacity of the sewer treatment plant. So from that standpoint, it wouldn't impact the city. The city would need additional staff and maintenance of a larger facility, and that's, part of the fiscal model anticipates, getting additional resources through tax base to pay for increased city services. So that needs to be considered, and yeah. And I forgot, I was going to mention one other thing in my presentation. So when you're done, I just want to make sure I remember to mention that.
Maybe you go ahead and then I'll maybe have some follow-up
So
questions.
I did want to mention this on the sustainability commitments. One thing of note is that the anticipated hospital property is excluded. Now this is just a subdivision plat, so we don't know if a hospital or a hospital campus will actually go there. So I did talk to the applicant about that, and I think they're willing to have some modified language to account for that. So if the hospital doesn't go there, some of the commitments could be expanded to the property. I think there's a solar expansion, the solar per square foot. So I think it's a good thing to get a clarification from the applicant on that. And I do also want to note that, when the hospital, we hope the hospital comes to this development if it takes place, the hospital will have to go through a PUD review process. And, they have the ability at that time to make their own sustainability commitments. And so I think that's how it's trying to be set up, is that they're excluding it, not necessarily because the hospital would be excluded, but you could ask for the hospital to engage in sustainability commitments at that time. So I just wanted to mention that. I mean, we certainly shouldn't talk about the details because that would be a future application, but it's being structured so that they are excluded at the subdivision plat stage, but there could be discussions at the PUD stage for similar commitments.
So in the case of currently, those revised sustainability commitments are very light, and it's very short, right? We would expect to see quite a bit more detail at the PUD stage.
I think that, so I'll say from staff standpoint, when we were working on the GDP last year, because of the purpose and intent of a general development plan, having sustainability commitments as part of how the development is designed and the character of the development certainly makes a lot of sense. I think the applicant has proposed sustainability measures as part of a plat, which, that level of a regulation, usually just rely on your building code. So I think if Planning Commission wants to discuss with the applicant sustainability commitments beyond what they're voluntarily proposing, we should think about what part of the subdivision ordinance, relates to, the type of condition that you want to propose related to sustainability, since this isn't the zoning document and this is the plat document.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions of staff? Commissioner Howe?
Could I go back to, so the assumption is that we have the ability in the city, the land and the resources to expand our sewer treatment facility. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Krantz?
Yeah, I have a question on a different topic, and it has to do with the, that one part that you showed about the industrial use. Would it be possible for you to go back to page 25, the top of page 25, just so you know which one I'm talking about? It was where you had the right there. So that was where it says research office and corporate uses for the research development, et cetera. That was like the line 8 in the permitted use tables in the GDP. But I have a question about that, because I know that I'm asking because there's 2 types of industrial uses that are allowed in our codes, that are designated in our city code. One for a planned community zone district commercial, and another for a planned community zone district industrial. And you pointed us out just right below there, I think, to section 1772-090. And that's the code that specifies what's allowed in a PCZD commercial, like we have with the ConocoPhillips GDP. And if you go in there, there's a list of 23 different uses, and loose number 18 says the exact same words there. And if you don't mind if I just read it real quick, it says research office and corporate uses and facilities for the manufacturing, fabrication, processing, or assembly of scientific or technical products or other products. But then the code goes on to say that such facilities shall be completely enclosed, and any noise, smoke, dust, odor, or other environmental contamination produced by such facilities must be confined to the lot upon which such facilities are located. Mm-hmm. So is what we're looking at there an abbreviated version of the type of industrial that's allowed in section 1772-090? And we would assume that no emissions are allowed beyond the property line?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So oftentimes when you have zoning ordinances that are, I'm going to say additive to each other, the most restrictive is going to take precedent. So that's one way to look at it. So I think that if these types of facilities were to take place, it is potential that they'd have to meet those other restrictive standards as well. I think that's my best answer at this point, because we don't have a proposed use in front of us, but we would make sure that it meets all of the applicable use standards if we had that in front of us.
Yeah, I just thought it was an important clarification, because in section 1772-100 for an industrial zone PCZD, it says that the industrial uses may have emissions beyond the property line as long as they meet the city, state, and federal regulations. And I thought that was an important distinction, because when I'm just struggling a little bit when we evaluate the uses against compliance with the GDP, I'm not sure, I'm just wondering if we don't, if we have enough detail in what the applicant's given us about the uses that they're proposing for us to evaluate compliance with that part of the code.
Well, again, I would say there's no uses proposed. There are potential uses out there. We've modeled a series of likely uses. And, you know, I think having emissions, I think if you're asking me, would any uses that meet the industrial standard that you just mentioned, I don't see that that industrial standard is reflected either in the GDP or in the commercial office language. So I don't think, I mean, that use is not allowed.
Right,
To be clear, that use is not allowed.
okay. Then, I'm sorry, just to follow up on that a little bit, I'm trying to evaluate, like you said, we need to vet this against the current GDP. And in the preliminary plat contents, section M states that they're supposed to give us the uses. And the uses that I would vet against those are the uses that are in the cover letter that Mr. Hardy provided to us when he filed this. Is that right? Or do I also look at the uses that are in the transportation plan?
I think in staff's opinion on this, the uses are set through the code and the GDP. And so those uses are provided. Any of those uses are allowed. I would recommend that the commission consider any of the uses. There's no restriction on mix of uses. It doesn't say it has to be 50% industrial, 50% office, or 50% research, as it said. I shouldn't use the word industrial because that's not allowed. In that word isn't included. But it could be any mix of those uses
Right.
that's allowed. So could this be 80% retail under the zoning ordinance? Yes. There's no restriction on that. Is it likely? We don't think so. I think part of this exercise is understanding likely market-supported uses and then trying to do studies and assumptions based off of that. But the commission needs to understand that the GDP and the ordinance allows any use as written. It allows any use, and there's no restriction on ratios of uses in this version of the GDP. The GDP that we were reviewing last year had a lot more detail about different uses and ratios of uses and where uses could be allowed in different subdistricts. That is no longer part of this consideration. It's just being reviewed against the 2010 GDP, which allows any allowed use in any amount or ratio within the development.
Okay, and that helps a lot. I was just really concerned about emissions beyond the site boundaries because we had mentioned pharmaceutical manufacturing, and that's an industry that typically would require an air permit, a NIPDES permit, and for operating, and would not be allowed.
Right, and I'm not going to speak to if pharmaceutical
okay.
manufacturing would be allowed, because I don't know enough about it
Okay.
to know if you can do it with or without emissions across the property
Okay.
line.
Got it. Thank you so much. It really helped. I really appreciate all the detail in this part of your presentation.
Additional questions? Please, Commissioner Osterman.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a quick question about the public land dedication in the northwest corner. So that area, as I understand, is to be developed by the city into a park. And I just noted that in the public comments, there were some concerns about the suitability of that land, whether it could really be developed into a park, if it would be cost prohibitive or not feasible, and I was just curious about staff's opinion on that.
Right, well, I wouldn't say we've done a engineering feasibility study, but we've been out with park staff to look at the property, and they were not concerned about, it would take, you know, as you're going to the corner of the intersection, it's actually, you know, fairly flat, and as you get further towards the open space parcel, it does tail off a fair amount, so it would take grading and flattening of portions of the property, but there was no concern just based on a site visit with park staff that it could be used as a park.
Thanks.
Just a follow-up on that. If I remember right, the the applicant, the developer, would be responsible for actually that grading and the development of the parks.
Let me clarify that. That's actually not included in the proposal. It would just be
Okay.
the land dedication. And then the city would develop the park. So there would be no contribution directly or actual construction or grading for the park in the current proposal.
Okay. I wonder where I saw that then. Maybe it was in the previous.
Yeah, in the
20
previous application, I think we might have, I'm getting them
Okay.
all confused. There was we did ask the applicant for kind of a feasibility analysis of sorts,
Okay.
where if we were to grade in a series of fields in a parking lot,
Mhm.
what would that look like?
Okay.
There wasn't a specific proposal, so they did show that you could grade the property
Mhm.
to accommodate a small parking lot and a series of multi-purpose fields.
Okay.
And that was just an exercise, not a proposal.
Okay.
Commissioner Howe?
Thanks. Can you comment on I asked you about the sewer and just a follow-up on the infrastructure of water. Could you comment on the plan to provide water? And I assume that is concurrent with the sewer lines. And is there any plan to reuse the water? I think there was some comment on here about that. And then the last comment is, I think of water as like a finite amount. There's not more water that we're getting to provide this area, I assume.
Right, so the city does charge tap fees for new development, and part of those tap fees goes towards water rights acquisition. So the city does have a program and does actively acquire water to accommodate new development. So the applicant will have to build mainline infrastructure as well as the internal infrastructure. I do not believe we are anticipating the need to expand our water treatment and distribution facilities as part of this development. I think with the older versions that had more square footage, it was breaking that threshold. I believe that we don't think they're gonna have to expand that. And again, the city has a program for acquiring water rights. It doesn't mean there's more water in our world or community, but it's just about the water rights.
And I know that and you may or may not know the answer to this. I know there's gray water that's provided to the Coal Creek Golf Course, and I'm trying to think of the proximity here. Is there any plan to provide irrigation in that manner to this
Not that I'm
project?
aware of.
Maybe we can ask the applicant more about that because that had been discussed previously, so. Any additional questions for staff?
One more question,
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
Regarding the differentiation between the preliminary plat and the final plat, you said that we would have to agree on passing both of those. If we just pass the preliminary plat, then it would come back to us within 12 months. And what change in the presentation would that have with the final plat?
Well, the final plat would have to conform to the preliminary plat. So if this was just a preliminary plat that went through Planning Commission and then City Council, it wouldn't have the same level of detail. It wouldn't have a subdivision improvement agreement. It would be more of the easements and the lot layout and maybe some anticipated provisions for final plat. And then that plat that comes back has to comply. So you can't really make major modifications to the proposal. It's really just finishing the really detailed elements of the plat.
That helps. Thank you very much for answering that.
Great, any final questions right now for staff? Seeing none, thank you. And we'd invite the applicant up at this time. Actually, why don't let's take a quick 5-minute, very quick 5-minute break.
Recording stopped.
Hey, Keaton or Tamara, Is it cold in here?
I feel cold a little bit.
Yeah.
Does anybody else feel cold?
I'm going to ask them to turn it up, turn the volume.
I think if they bump it up 1 or 2 degrees,
Okay.
it's in the back of the room.
Is there a possibility we could turn up
I don't
the
think-
thermostat?
I don't think
No,
he knows
are you in charge of the thermostat?
Yeah.
Okay.
The back of the room?
I could, is
See
that
those,
right in the back?
you see
Right back?
those 2 boxes on
Yeah,
the wall there?
right in the center of the room.
Yeah,
Okay, I can,
one of them might have
yeah,
that
if you don't
ability.
mind, I'd love to bump it
Oh,
up.
it's gonna be great, yeah.
We need our.
You have a t-shirt on. That's mine. Okay. So you might be.
How many commissioners does it take? We're a lot of hot air in this room. The CO2 levels are going.
How's it going back there?
It's great. Loud humming noises and all. So.
I feel really stupid.
Oh, no,
You
no.
actually saw a thermostat in here?
Well,
sorry, does
we,
this-
so we
In
used
the
to be able
center of
to,
the room is the carbon monoxide monitor.
um,
And on the right is the lighting.
yeah, so those 2 boxes in front of the person who's looking at that,
Yeah, those,
Oh, yeah.
that is a thermostat?
one of them is,
Okay,
um,
all right, I'll try to get, it looked like it was a monitor of some sort.
huh.
Let me open it up.
Well, we can ask, do you know how to adjust the thermostat? The thermostat? A little warmer? Yeah. Oh, hey, Tamar. We got Rob on it. Oh, it's behind us now?
I feel like this one works the best.
Okay.
You just do that one up. I did it the other day and the AC turned off in like 30 seconds. So knock on wood. I did it here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right.
Is it over here?
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Is it right there? Is that it?
All right. Great. Yeah, is it okay? Okay, but how about the Zoom
Wrap
participants?
this up soon because my packet's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Hey, Lisa, I'm going to put this up to your PC too.
Great, if we can call the meeting back to order, please.
Recording in progress.
And if you begin with name and address, please.
Good evening, Jay Hardy with Brewbuckle Capital, 1144 15th Street in Denver. I don't have a presentation this evening. We gave our presentation the last go-around. I don't have anything more to add. We did have, as follow-up comments to a series of questions, we provided 8 or 10 reports. Rob, Director Zaccaro's gone through those. Probably the 2 of note is the finished TDM and then also the sustainability commitment, and really more in a form rather than in a PowerPoint form, but as an exhibit to the SIA. So we've provided that. It was in your packet. And I think that's really all I have. That would be nothing really in addition other than what's already been gone over this evening.
All right. Questions of the applicant? Commissioner Meline?
Thanks. So would you be willing to, let me ask this. How do you propose to have those TDM and sustainability commitments apply to the people in the development, I guess? Like,
Well,
would they be, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the sustainability commitment will be an exhibit to the SIA,
Okay.
as Director Zaccaro said. So it'll be
Okay.
implemented and executed that way. The TDM, I would expect to be the same.
Same, okay.
And then within each PUD, you know, it'll be evaluated as you go down that path. I would say the one exception that Director Zaccaro talked about was related to the solar generation, and our commitment is really anything that we develop to develop 1 watt per buildable square foot. So it's a very specific number because it basically takes the maximum minus what's under contract with the hospital, and then they would address that with you all at a PUD level.
Okay.
So they were not opposed to it, but they did not want to necessarily make that commitment up front. In the event that the hospital did not move forward with their contract and we went and developed it, then we would add that and maintain our commitment at 1 per buildable square foot. So it'd go up to about the 2.6 million.
Okay. And then one last thing on that. Some of the ERO reports provided some recommendations. I don't recall seeing anything that described the developer's commitment to following those recommendations. Do you have thoughts about how you would do that?
Do you have a specific example? Because many of
I
those were
don't
following.
necessarily, but I guess I can remember, I can recall looking at their prairie dog management plan, for example, and they had a series of steps and recommendations that they had in that. I'm wondering if we were to, so those recommendations were provided to you,
Right.
and I'm wondering how we can hold you to those recommendations. I mean, I guess we can suggest a condition, and I'm curious your thoughts about that.
I mean, we have not said that we wouldn't follow, that we would go against any of those, or
Okay.
we're not in agreement.
Okay.
So if we need another exhibit to the SIA, that could be a conditional part of the approval.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much.
Additional questions? Commissioner Howe?
Can you clarify the contributions you guys would make to the water and sewer facilities through this project?
Sure. So within the first phase, the lift station in the southeast corner would be built at the very beginning. And as Director Zaccaro said, that's extended up to the wastewater treatment plant. So 100% of that is paid for through the Metropolitan District. Then when we get to a certain threshold of development that is required for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, that's all being designed now, paid for by our team.
All right, thanks.
Additional questions? Regarding the sustainability commitments, so it seemed like there was kind of a light version, not the full that had been previously proposed. How do you respond to that? It's kind of filled with loopholes and doesn't commit to certain levels of LEED certification. It just uses LEED certification in the generic, which doesn't really necessarily amount to much.
Yeah, so I went back through, I heard your comment earlier this evening. We did have 13 conditions last fall, and many of those are either being met through a different path or they're irrelevant. Like the first one was the amount of open space. We're far exceeding that now. The second one was the development program at 3 million square feet. That's defined differently now. Removal of a gas station. There was a lot of information in there about common open space, about height, building heights, and all of those are really not relevant now. So it probably felt less because there's only, 5 main categories instead of 13, but many of those are still being met in a different path. The difference, I guess, would be the full sustainability action plan, that single document versus how we've outlined Exhibit H. But there's nothing in there that we wouldn't do. So if we wanted to reinstitute that sustainability action plan, that's, again, could be an exhibit to it. The one difference with our development partner with Sterling Bay, there were different LEED certification pieces, and there's not a willingness for us to go above LEED certified at this level. When we get to the PUD level where we're actually doing uses and those things, we could have a discussion there. But at a broader level, there was really not a willingness to go above LEED certified at this point.
Okay, that's an important distinction. Thank you. Regarding the raw water and availability and usage of raw water on site, have you evaluated that?
Yeah, we evaluated it quite a bit early on, and Jordan Swisher's here if we have any very specific ones. She was working on it more than I was at the time. But we went through with Corey within the city staff, and there were some challenges within the cities. Do you want to speak to it? Jordan Swisher, sorry.
I asked Dewberry, who also did, sorry, Jordan Swisher, Brew Buckle, okay.
Address though, just, yeah.
Same address. We looked at it, Dewberry looked at it for water ends, for sewer when we were evaluating it originally, and there was issues with the city already being in the Coal Creek that was like down the hill, that like being met at capacity, and us not being able to tap into existing infrastructure, and then there became a whole new, like, it become very complex and involved, and likely not recommended to build a whole other system network so close to the one that exists but that was at capacity. And this is my laywoman understanding of the engineering. But we did explore it. I think the. Okay, sure. So then additionally, I think the best opportunity for benefiting from the water rights is that the property does have inherent water rights. There are some within Goodhue Ditch, but they're not very impactful and they're unreliable and variable. But there is the FRICO share, which actually is a greater supply of water that comes into the property from 88th Street. And that would be, I think, you would have to have probably a PUD on the west side of the property, look at incorporating, leveraging that to do irrigation or I don't think it would expand the whole length of the property, but that's the greatest opportunity I saw when we were evaluating.
Thank you. Please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Swisher, I got a little bit confused on the end part, and I don't know if I'm the only one who's confused. But you said on the west side of the property, that would be for raw water for irrigation that you could tap into, in addition to the water rights that would be used for clean water for the development.
The inherent water rights that come with
Okay.
the property that aren't through the tap fees or acquisition of the city is from a FRICO share that flows into the property from like the 88th Street boundary.
Oh, so sorry. Where would would you be, just to, and really briefly, would you be able to get, use raw water for irrigation?
We could leverage that. So like,
Okay.
here's an example. In practicality, Storage Tech had that water right, restored it, built a pond, and would pump it out to do fire suppression and other types of irrigation in the past. That's how it was used. Okay.
Additional questions for the applicant? Yes, Commissioner Howe.
Just building on the comment that I had last time regarding the intersection at 96th and Campus Drive. Can you, last time you had mentioned that, and I want this to be a constructive discussion that we have between each other. Last time you had mentioned that you had talked about different options, none of which were as good as this one. And I wanted you to walk us through what other options you had thought about. Obviously, we need an in and out from this. It seems to me, well, I mean, when we look at the traffic studies, that we're getting a failing grade on some of this as soon as 2027. So I wanted to hear what you had to say about other options that you had thought about, why those didn't work. I think this seems to be one of the issues in my mind that if we could resolve, this would really put my mind at ease.
So the initial valuation would have come right across the north property line against Boulder County land, and there's a requirement for a setback there. So both Boulder County as well as the school district didn't approve of that, okay? So then we dropped it down and then brought it back. And in that case, it would have cut across some of that 47 acres and tied into Paradise Lane, okay? That would have moved it further north, but we ran into the border on the north side. So then we dropped it down and brought it up to where it is now, and then that leaves that 47.4 acres. So it was the only option that was supported by Boulder County, the city. It met all the different regulations. So that's the one that everybody approved, and other groups didn't approve the others. So.
And I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'll apologize to everyone for any ideas that I have, but is there a possibility of going south? There's a three-way intersection. I know this isn't my area of expertise, but did you look at any other traffic flows that didn't include the 96 to Campus Drive, that maybe went through the property in a different manner? Or were those the two that you looked at?
And tied in to the east where? Directly onto the parkway?
I don't know the name of that road, but it was an entrance into Storage Tech in the past. Is where that stone
Oh, taped or disc drive.
Disc drive entrance.
disc drive entrance.
That was not evaluated because Northwest Parkway didn't exist at the time that
Right.
Storage Tech was there.
I'm just trying to think, how could that would be a little further away from, I'm just trying to get more distance so that we could get a better traffic evaluation and passing grade on that. Okay, well, thanks for that information.
Additional questions, Commissioner Krantz?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about without the map in front of us too, but when you did the traffic analysis for that 700 and whether or not that 740-foot distance between the intersections would
Queuing,
back up, queuing analysis, thank you. Was that done before the plan for a hospital or after the plan? Was that incorporating the new traffic numbers
Yeah, good.
with the hospital included, or was that before the hospital
Good
was
question.
included?
So last fall, the hospital was not part of that. So in the traffic plan that was March 20-ish of 2021, that did not include a hospital. So when we put the hospital under contract, we were asked to update that with the hospital. So everything that you saw that was dated July 22nd of this year, I think that's the date, maybe on August 22nd, I think it's July 22nd, that all incorporates the hospital being there. All the traffic numbers include the hospital being included.
And there was a queuing analysis specifically provided at the last meeting, and that does include the hospital in the analysis.
Thank you,
the
that's
one
exactly what I
thing-
was asking.
The one thing I mentioned last time, and again, without the map, I don't think it's a big deal, but what that plan did is it added the hospital on the east side. But what it didn't do is take the hospital away on the west side. And so that traffic is frankly overrepresented on 88th. So there's actually going to be a significant reduction of traffic over in those neighborhoods and where the school and those senior facilities would be up where the current hospital is. So, but everything in the latest traffic plan included a hospital and the medical office building at full build out.
On a lot of the public comments, there's some concerns about 4-lane roads. Do you want to comment on that and maybe address those concerns?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. That was also part of the example, and they looked at it as a 2-lane, and it doesn't work coming into the roundabout on either locations. Coming in from the east side at both Campus Drive and the Rock Crest application.
Commissioner Osterman?
Thanks. I have a question about the square footage build-out that's proposed, so the 2.56 million. My understanding is that that Storage Tech occupied 1.6 million square feet. And so my question is just to understand if in the process of developing the plans, there was ever a consideration for how the square footage that you're currently proposing could be condensed within a smaller footprint, for example, only occupying the former storage tech area in order or as a way of allowing more of the natural land to remain intact. So it's a question about the feasibility of clustering, whether that was considered.
Yeah, we did an extensive, if you look in the GDP from last fall, there was a lot of conversation around clustering and that was approved and then overturned. You know, the difference between storage tech, so the guideline within the GDP, the 2010 GDP is tied to the 0.15 rural designation. So everything that you're seeing from us really takes it right up to the top of that. Maybe we'll build all that, maybe we won't build that. But the uses will be different than they were with storage tech. So we did evaluate it. We evaluated height, we evaluated clustering. Those were all in number 5, 6, and 7 of the GDP last fall. But those are really irrelevant now because we're not working from that GDP. But it's the 0.15 that keeps it a rural designation that gives us what that maximum buildable square footage is.
Any additional questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to go a little bit deeper into that question, the GDP that was, and the ordinance that was approved and then rejected by the voters included 3 million square feet. And this has a reduced density. So would it be possible, given the reduced density, I hope I'm not asking the same question over, I'm just maybe rephrasing it a little bit, but would it be possible to, with the reduced density, to allow more private common open space and to cluster it more into the lower portion of the site? There was a lot of public comments requesting that there be no development above Disk Drive, where there's most things in there,
Yeah,
more
so
natural habitat.
Excuse me, sorry about that.
That's great.
So the 2.6 million square feet that is being represented now in any of the site plans, we've eliminated some of the buildings, which actually up in the northwest corner allowed us to provide more open space to the city up in that location. Then there was a 18-acre parcel that we offered to be open space. The staff looked at it and really didn't feel like it was, you know, between 36 and those proposed office buildings. So there's less square footage there. There's less square footage up near that open space because we felt like that was the right location, you know, to add on to the current open space. So the 38 acres up in the northwest corner, that's bigger now because of the reduced square footage, because we reduced buildings up there. But it did not change anything that would have been north of Tape Drive.
Okay, I'm not really seeing that increased open space between what was proposed last time and this time. Maybe we need a map to look at that. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. Would it be possible to pull up a map and show that?
Right?
All I was saying was that there's less buildings now because there's less square footage. And they came from the adjacent areas up in the northwest corner.
Okay, so less square footage up on the northwest corner, but the boundary between the development and the open space remains the same place, as it was not from planning, but what was approved from the GDP.
Can you just clarify a little bit what you want to map of?
Okay, I was just trying to, I was basically asking if it was possible to condense the development more, given that there's less square foot from before, because the open space boundaries to me seem the same.
Right.
And I'm misunderstanding what Mr. Hardy's saying about the
Yeah, I
about
was
there being
asking-
more open space.
Sorry, I was asking about what map you wanted to see.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could we see the map that shows the open space? It was one of the attachments to our August 11th memo.
Yeah, so you want to open,
Thank you so much.
oh, the one you had, the one you just had up.
And
Yeah, so just click share that one. Nope, scroll up. So this is the open space proposal. I don't know if this is the map you were looking at. This doesn't include the 47 acres. If you scroll down, then keep going to the next page. Then there's the 47 acres to the north. So it's this property here, which is north of the campus drive. And then if you go back up to the other map, this is the proposal for public land dedication and open space. Was that what you were looking for?
yes, and
Okay.
since this is the same as what was proposed and to city council with the 29 additional acres that were proposed by the ordinance, with the exception of the
So-
open space, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if it could be, if the development footprint could be reduced due to the reduced square footage. This is the same as what we saw for 3 million square feet. That was my question.
Right, I understand. Yep. So I think the.
Yeah,
the
I'm sorry if
for
I
the
was
applicant.
confusing in the question.
No, that's okay. This corner, or this, I'll just call it a triangle, was an addition. This is an addition from the fall 21 GDP. So this was added, and then the 47.4 was added. The footprint that I think you're talking about is basically generally all of this.
The white area, yeah.
And so this did get smaller based on the addition of this. So there was a building positioned here. This actually got a little bit bigger. I can't say it was probably more than an acre. But there were 5 buildings in here. Now I think there's 3. So the places that it got smaller is in this location, adding this and adding all of that.
Can I
Additional
ask one?
questions?
I am looking at this, and when I see that open space that's coming down along 36, it looks so close to connecting with the Broomfield Conservation Easement. And would that be something you'd be willing to consider expanding for connectivity between our Coal Creek and Rock Creek waterways for wildlife?
Can you move that map up just a little bit? Are you talking about connecting this down to this? Yeah. We've got the Excel substation here. I don't see why we couldn't do that. There's a trail that comes here, and then it goes up here and connects into the trail system of Northwest Parkway. We don't have any facilities. I don't have the map right in front of me, but if you're asking just to connect this down to where that trail is, I think that's something that could be considered. I don't know why we couldn't. It's not going to be buildable either way.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for the applicant at this time? Seeing none, then I'd like to open up public comment. If we can begin with a motion to introduce addendums 1 and 2 to our public comment.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And we'll invite people up. Please limit yourself to 3 minutes. No aggregating of time. Begin with stating your full name and address. We will be alternating between people in the room and then people both on Zoom and by telephone. If we can begin with our first person on deck.
So we will start with 2 in the room with Laura Page and then Jojo Fulmar on deck.
Hello, I'm Laura Page at 920 Rex Street.
Sorry, and if you make sure the microphone is.
Not close enough?
Yeah. I wanna
Okay,
make sure.
sorry,
Make it on,
sounded
yeah.
really loud. I have my hearing aid up, I guess. You've heard these numbers over and over and over again. 16.04.202 requires that this development preserve and enhance, to the extent reasonably possible, the natural beauty and topography of the city. That's in part, and it goes on. I just cannot see how grading almost the whole entirety of this property is preserving the natural beauty and particularly the topography of the city. That land has natural undulations, and they're making it into a flat area. It seems like Storage Tech did a good job of using the topography. I think ConocoPhillips was going to incorporate the highs and lows of the property in order to better hide the buildings that they planned. I just don't see that happening here, so I think it's a failure. I think this proposal does not meet the requirements of our city code. That continues on at 16.16.010, again in part, the vegetation of the area, including trees, must be preserved to the extent possible. Yet again, the vast majority of the property is due to be scraped and either dug deeper or added to in order to level it out. So again, I see this proposal as a failure and not meeting code. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jojo Fulmar, and I live at 1712 Steel Street in Louisville. And all of the things I brought up last time, I still think that those issues are important to why this should not be recommended for approval. And I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about its effect on Monarch, because I do have several friends who go to that school, although I do go to Centaurus. So Monarch is right next to this area, and several of the classrooms in Monarch look out over this area. And right now it is just plains with like hills and grass, and being able to look out of the classroom and see this is so much better than looking out and seeing just buildings and all of the land being graded. And it would is so much more productive for learning and for all of the students and faculty there. And additionally, with Monarch Drive or Campus Drive there, expanding it is like required for this, and it wouldn't even help much, because with all the added traffic, even though it's being expanded, it will still be so unsafe due to the 20,000 new car trips every day. And then another point regarding this is, as with the previous comment, the preservation of all the trees and the other landscape in the area, and all of that wild grassland and all of those old trees are so important to the ecosystem and the vitality of that area for all of the wildlife in that area. And so it'd be a real tragedy if it was all graded and removed. Thank you.
Thank you. We can jump to some of the people online.
So just noting there's no hands raised online. For those of you watching, your camera looks different tonight. We're aware of that. We're having a technical malfunction with some equipment, but we do think you should be able to raise your hand and participate if you desire. So we'll do two more in the room at this time. We'll do Jesse Truman and then Sherry Summer on deck.
And I also note there's one phone number showing up, so that's *9 to raise your hand virtually.
Hi, my name is Jesse Truman. I actually live on Paradise Lane, one of the 4 people out there on the prairie. I am actually here to speak in support of this project. I think that the developers have gone through a lot of things to get where we are today. We actually love the open space that is around us. And this plan would actually preserve what is there. We actually have a lot of interest in seeing the site get developed. For me personally, two reasons. One, I have a ninth grader that just started going to Monarch, and we live half a mile from the house, and it takes us 30 minutes some days round trip to go around and sit in traffic. So something needs to be done sooner or later, and I think the proposal that's put forth right now is a very good one. And also, we are personally excited. I know that you can't count what I'm going to say for the other four neighbors. I know that Larry and Karen Thompson, I think, emailed some comments in. But all four of us are on the same page and really would like to see this done. And then secondly, the open space that they're proposing, we're really excited about. The trails, we're really excited about. I think that, for me and my family to go out our backyard and the trail that's proposed along the Goodhue Ditch that would basically connect this development to, we can get to downtown Louisville. I mean, I'm looking forward to taking bikes with my family and come down here and eat dinner. I do think that there'll be a lot of benefits for the downtown businesses as well. I think that you will get foot traffic and pedestrian and bike traffic of people that want to come down here for lunch. Yeah, so that's all I have to say. Thanks for hearing us out.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for your time. Sherry Summer, 910 South Palisade Court. Can you hear me? Thank you, sorry. So I think the wrong question was asked. The question was asked, can you look at the preliminary and final plats at the same time? That's not the right question. The right question is, do you have all the materials necessary to fulfill the requirements of the code to consider the plats? Now, this plat was filed, I think, last September or October, and I'm looking at some of these documents that have just sort of hastily been added to the pile. The bird studies, January 2021, raptor study 2020. These are outdated, and they were not updated. They could have been updated because burrowing owls also, they can be done between October and April. So there was fully the ability to update those things and have them in this packet for you. The requirement is that the packet shall have all the documents required, and that includes the tree inventory. So I'm kind of disappointed, really, that things are being just sort of thrown in at the last minute in such a haphazard way. That's not according to the code. And the way I understand the code is, in an election, we were outspent by, 36-1, but here we're all equal. The applicant is equal, the people are equal. If we had 1,000 people in here screaming, it wouldn't make a difference. What matters is the code, and our council people swear an oath to uphold the code. So you're doing everybody a favor to sieve this through the code and make sure that it adheres to the code, because that's their oath. That's their obligation. I want to address some of the things that were said tonight. The letter from the Army Corps of Engineers was submitted in 2019. It's being reviewed by the EPA right now. I've contacted Jade Collingsworth. If you look at that, the requirements, those exemptions can only be given for agricultural purposes, not for commercial, like building a road. And I called the Army Corps of Engineers, and I talked to somebody at the desk, and he confirmed that, and now Jay is going to confirm that. So that exemption is not sufficient. They probably require a permit. Let's see here. I think that it is not true that you could have any mix of industrial and commercial and retail zoning. This is a commercial area. And you and City Council are required to determine the type and character of the development. So if you approved like 100% industrial, that character is not right. This is not an industrial zoning. I wanted to say the tree study. Sorry, I'm replying to a lot of things that we had talked about tonight. The tree study doesn't say what trees will be preserved. The statement that the 18 acres that were added during the OSAB public review process has expanded the open space, and now there's, fewer buildings on the additional of the plat is not true, because it's too steep to build on, as we just heard, the additional area that was requested by Commissioner Krantz. So that doesn't change the amount of buildings on the plat whatsoever. I would really like to get verification from Public Works Department that all the items on the checklist have been verified and that everything is buttoned up, because I haven't seen anything in the documents. Oh, I'm sorry. Going back to the required documents, we don't have an agreement from a ditch company that I've seen. Have you? That's a question. Do we have because I believe that the Ordinance 1811 was passed without that agreement. So I don't know what would have happened. Like, are we just going to force the hand of the ditch company? The introductory letter says that Brubacher has contacted the ditch company. So if they haven't responded, I'm kind of wondering why. I really request that you ask for Alan Gill to speak up about the buildability of this plat, because he very strongly said that this would be way too expensive for the city to develop. He said that in the Parks meeting, and I really would hope that you would request of the planning department to get a statement from him. Just not having the willingness to do things like to condense plats or to put in a third underpass, that's not really an answer. Sorry, I used up all my time, but I really want you to look at Campus Drive. They've only considered 2 options, and during the election they said, you'll absolutely have to go back to that other option, and it's so terrible. And now here we are, boom, here's this option they've been presenting all the time. Now, what are the requirements to do this process correctly? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll do 2 more in the room, no hands raised online. We'll have Cynthia Korn Musselwhite and Mike Chance.
Cynthia Korn, Musselwhite, 438 Jefferson Avenue, Louisville. Okay, so I think it should be noted that I heard Director Zuccaro represent himself as head of the planning department. He did not indicate that he's serving as city manager this evening. And the city manager is supposed to be presenting the final plat to Planning Commission according to the code. So I'd like that on the record. Also, in your action on preliminary and final plats, section 16.12.075, in deciding whether to approve with mods, or deny, whether it conforms to all the requirements of this title, whether it's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. So again, I respectfully disagree, Director Zuccaro. The regulatory ruling documents include the GDP, but it also includes the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan gives you a lot of latitude, and you have all asked really terrific questions tonight, very fair. Like, why do they want to grade over the whole property? Why wouldn't they condense the development further down? Where are the sustainability commitments? It was a tough election. And I don't like to get into motives, but this got filed and onto calendars pretty quickly following that election. So it's like, okay, voted this down here. We're going to resurrect this thing from last fall and make no changes. Okay, so very fair questions. I'm very appreciative for all the questions from the comprehensive plan. I would suggest before you do any votes on this or decide what to do, the vision statement specifically says on sustainability, the following core community values are the foundation upon which the city of Louisville will make decisions and achieve the community's vision. Sustainable practices for the economy, community, and the environment, where we challenge our government, residents, property owners, and our business owners to be innovative with sustainable practices so the needs of today are met without compromising the needs of future generations. This iconic property is the entry into Boulder County from the world. ConocoPhillips took down the buildings in sustainable ways. They ground it up. We were all so excited. And we still are willing to strike compromise. So, I have tried to speak with Jay Hardy and Greg Bockel after meetings, after the open space meeting. They aren't interested in having a conversation. They don't, oh, Cynthia, your question about 4-lane roads, I'll just have to talk to everybody. Well, we're willing to sit down. So as Planning Commission, you're in a position to deny and suggest back to them, we're good folks. The folks in Louisville, we're good folks. We want to sit down. Fine, we'll sit down and come up with a compromise. That's when everybody can be more sustainable. I'm out of time. There are 3 other things. There's a whole list in our core community values. A balanced transportation system, civic participation and volunteerism, being open, efficient, and fiscally responsible government. Since we've only had the planning department present, the question that Sherry raised about public works is really valid.
If you can wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, if you
No,
had
that's
a couple of final sentences.
Yeah, so there's an opportunity for us to still have this meet the needs of everyone. Maybe I'm idealistic. I don't see any bad characters here, but this is not good enough. It's a far cry, and you have all the latitude you want to deny it.
Thank you.
Good evening. Mike Shantz, 623 West Hickory Court. I'm here to note that I fully support the current plan for Red Tail Ridge for the following reasons. As a former member of OSAB, I've had the opportunity to tour this site in person, and the current plat does a good job of going well beyond the required public land dedication, and more importantly, the proposed public land dedication would serve to leave the majority of the more minimally impacted northern portion of this site intact, while concentrating the redevelopment in the areas of the previous storage tech footprint. 2, this plan also allows for important regional and local trail connections that would benefit the citizens of Louisville and in fact the entire region. 3, this development commits to sustainability measures that exceed our own sustainability action plan. This is commendable and should be supported. 4, given that Avista has an agreement in place to purchase 40 acres at the Red Tail site, it's critical to support this project to provide a home for what will be a new state-of-the-art medical facility for the region. 5, this development will bring new life and biosciences facilities to Louisville, generating high-wage jobs and associated tax revenue for the city. 6, the developer's commitment to complete the Campus Drive extension in a timely fashion is an important safety improvement for the students attending Monarch. Being able to realize all these benefits by utilizing what is essentially a previously developed brownfield site is responsible development. Presumably, this is why earlier iterations of this project were approved by OSAB and Planning Commission. This latest plan only improves upon these earlier plans, so I'm hopeful that the Commission will see fit to approve this latest iteration of the plan so we don't jeopardize the many benefits associated with the redevelopment of this former commercial site. I would also like to remind those speaking against Redtail, based on impacts to flora and fauna, that saying no to Redtail doesn't mean that these facilities aren't ultimately built. It simply means that they will be built somewhere else, where some of them will almost certainly be built on greenfield sites that will no doubt impact habitat and wildlife in a more dramatic fashion than on this former commercial site. Additionally, if built somewhere else, Louisville residents will not benefit from the additional tax base, open space, and trail corridors. Lastly, Avista may also be forced to consider alternatives for their new state-of-the-art facilities. As a result, I strongly encourage approval of the plat currently in front of the Planning Commission this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Tim Stalker and Catherine Smith.
Hi, Tim Stalker from 806 West Dahlia Court, Louisville. I'm just going to start with a couple of things. I think the comprehensive plan hasn't really figured into the conversation about this plat nearly enough, and that I think you really need to take a look at it from two concepts that the plan really expands upon, and a shift from former greenfield expansion to infill redevelopment. And the conceptual shift in the comprehensive plan from expansion to redevelopment of suburban areas in the city that have failed. They've failed because of single-purpose properties, too large of blocks, no integrated street systems, public lands confined to the fringes, everything that essentially gets the non-support from the public is reflected in a complete opposite look at how we're supposed to understand this plat in comparison to our comprehensive plan. In the comprehensive plan, it said it is important for the comprehensive plan to enable the development of more urban block patterns, building stock and community-supported land uses. Urban block patterns like that in Old Town and downtown Louisville have high resiliency and flexibility in accommodating development and redevelopment over time. Typical suburban block patterns have not demonstrated similar resiliency. If you're looking at approving this plat, you're essentially looking at going against a wonderful comprehensive plan that really did a great job of getting community input on the type of development that's tolerable in Louisville. If you take a look at the small area plan for McCaslin, read page 15 on the principles and measures for success. All of those are completely the opposite of what you see in this plat. Okay, I'll just conclude. The developer is proposing a block that's over 1,320 feet long. That's a quarter mile. That's a significant modification that our city planners have incorrectly explained to you in terms of how to apply code to that. You need to go through all of the criteria in 162430, I believe it is. And you need to go through that as a checklist, one after the other. It's not a selection of a criteria that you pick and choose from. The developer obviously has found a hardship that I would be great to hear as far as why that sort of block length is necessary. What in the site is preventing a smaller block in that case? The PUD development process would have a very difficult time of making any sort of modifications to get any kind of greenery or open space in between east to west. And lastly, I'll just conclude, Track C should be a modification according to the conflicting uses in that space. Everything is graded. It doesn't make any difference what's natural and what's not very good landscape in it. It's all going to be graded. So you need to understand that when you consider how much additional open space to make a condition for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Catherine
Right.
Smith.
Yeah.
Come on up, sorry.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Now can you hear me?
Yeah, it's better, yep.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Catherine Smith. I live at 608 West Street in Louisville. And I wanted to say something more nuanced to you all today about conditions and to expand on my comments last time. So I think if you think about it, there's sort of two ends of the spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, we have an application which has a very minor deficiency. Say there's an unsigned document, and the applicant represents to you, we can give you a signed document. We have it, we're sorry, we meant to include it. On the other side of the spectrum is an application that comes in that does not include documents that are required to meet the code or to demonstrate compliance with the code. And there's a lot of gray area in between. I will submit to you that you have an application that's leaning towards the side of an application that is missing core documents. What does it mean when you don't have core documents? It means that the ability of the Planning Commission to meet its duty to determine whether or not this applicant has conformed with the code, whether the application is consistent with the code and other applicable law, whether the application promotes the purposes, and whether the general design standards are met. When substantive documents are missing from the package, and you say, we're approving this application on the condition that you submit additional documentation to the staff, you are delegating, in effect, the judgment to the staff, unless you say it's a condition that you submit it and that the Planning Commission evaluate the new information. So to the extent that you ask for more information, I submit that what you should do is evaluate its substance, and when it is highly substantive, you should reconsider the application when it is complete, essentially. With regards to modifications, I agree with Tim Stalker's comments that you can't cherry pick just one of the many criteria, that they are interrelated, and in this circumstance, the applicant needs to comply with all of the factors that are listed there. I would like to point out that 161610 places the burden on the applicant for either a preliminary or a final subdivision plat to demonstrate that the standards are met. And that is different from from having you sort of make inferences. The code actually places a burden on the applicant to give you information that demonstrates that they are complying with the general design and construction standards. And I just finally want to conclude by making a quick comment about traffic, which I am not a traffic engineer, I don't understand anything, but what I do know is that when I drive, that's my sole qualification to say anything about traffic, I know that right now I get stuck on 96 where 42 is branching off where you go off to Exempla, and that is already just a complete traffic jam. And the irony of this whole thing is that if you were working at Redtail and you lived in downtown Louisville, you would get stuck in traffic today trying to get home. So I don't know whether that's a Planning Commission issue or another part of city government, but I really feel like somehow Louisville is missing the boat on traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't have any more cards and I don't see hands raised.
All right, then. We'll take a 5-minute break.
Recording stopped.
So we close it before, but we want to have, I want to leave it open right now so we can ask questions of staff if we have some follow-on. So officially after we close it, and then we're not really allowed to open it again to them, so. So we're almost there. So.
other's thoughts, I'm eager to hear everybody's thoughts.
Do you have any particular motivation or requirement to speed up our deliberations to make sure we do them in 1 hour? Or do you think that's realistic that we can?
I think it's potential.
Okay.
I do want to end before 9:30.
Okay.
If we had to continue, we could continue.
Okay, I was just making sure that continuing could be a possibility.
Oh,
Because I had a couple things I wanted to deliberate on, but I didn't want
Always
to.
a possibility,
I know
yes.
that my questions tend to be long.
Good.
Sorry from around here.
No,
Yes.
I am thinking that
You know, it's,
if we can try to cluster our deliberations.
I'm learning a lot.
That'll be helpful.
Yeah.
So we'll have a little bit more opportunity here while public comment is still open to ask
Yeah,
staff questions.
It's slow.
But after we
You know, I mean, but
close
thorough.
public comment, then we're not intended to go to staff.
Come around.
Because that's new information.
One compartment that I comment on, I've thought a lot about, because my profession is the open space question.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, just to.
Good, yeah, no, I am gonna lean on you for that for sure. I mean, absolutely, we all need that. So anything, yeah.
That would be good though, because I had some concerns about the open space too, but knowing that you're going to speak about that helps me not to have to. Sure. I think that might make things shorter. Yeah, it was great when we did that, when we went through this comments and the questions of the applicant. I didn't miss.
Right. I wonder.
So. Hey, Allison, join us. Actually, let me shut this off.
Recording in progress.
Great. We'll call the meeting back to order. Thank you all very much. We do not have any hands raised online, so at this point then, we'll move to applicant response and closing statement. This will give commission an opportunity for additional questions for the applicant after their presentation or statement.
Well, thank you. We appreciate all of your time and certainly the time of the community weighing in. You know, I think I'm going to summarize the same as I did the last time. We believe that, you know, our proposed plat is submitted as in accordance with the governing GDP that was approved in 2010. We think that our vision for this campus is the most innovative companies of the world to complete a next generation lab and manufacturing facilities. We think that's something that's great for this region. The ability to bring a new home to a vista, we think is an incredible opportunity. We're providing the second largest public land dedication in the city's history. We've got an innovative habitat management plan to be implemented to make sure that the habitat opportunities and the built environment for the habitat is substantial. And then obviously the extension of Campus Drive, I think everyone realizes how important that is you know, it's the top unfunded priority in Louisville's traffic master plan. So, you know, with that, we're happy to hear the deliberations, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Commissioner Moline.
Quick one, Mr. Hardy. Concurrence from the ditch company was brought up, and have you had discussions with them? I understand probably some of the, yeah.
Yes, we do. And
Okay.
We have the approval from them.
You do,
for
okay.
the relocation for the Goodhue ditch.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions for the applicant? Great, thank you very much. Then staff response and closing statement.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. The staff has no additional comments unless there's any questions.
I do have a question for you. So regarding the sustainability plan, if we were to come up with a condition for that, are you comfortable with it appearing there as a condition? Do you want to see it so that the applicant indicated a willingness to go back to what they had previously provided, their kind of more detailed plan? So if you can speak to
Yeah, I think if the, you know, if the applicant did express a willingness to go back to the plan, I have a clarification question. So there was just so for everybody's transparent and understand, so there was the plan itself, and that was a specific document with the GDP, and I think that was referenced. Within the resolution of approval that the City Council had passed, there were 4 additional conditions related to sustainability that aren't in the plan document itself. So I just want clarification on if the conditions just the original plan, sustainability commitment plan document, does it include the 4 additional conditions in the resolution? And then that could be included as a condition of the commission's approval if you want to add it.
Okay.
So I think the applicant, it wasn't clear to me that the applicant was agreeing to the conditions in the resolution, just the plan itself, so there may need to be clarification.
Thanks, yeah. And is it too late to pull that up, the additional conditions?
No, I
think
can pull them up in about a minute.
We'll give you some time,
here.
yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. All right. Any additional questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Krantz, we may need to actually give him a minute here to pull it up if it's for Director Zucchero. Question, yeah. Yeah, let's give him a moment here while we. And as we all move into the deliberations, I'm looking forward to discussing this with you all to see, but I felt like we probably needed to be refreshed on what these are.
So within the resolution, it was 7, 8, 9, and then I think 12, so I'll have to scroll down. So there was the related to lead silver, so the applicant had expressed earlier that they did not want to commit to over LEED certified, but the applicant can come up and speak to that if you have questions. The 3 megawatts of solar, there's a modified commitment with the hospital. All electric HVAC and domestic water heating systems. With some exceptions, so there's language with exceptions there. So that's number 9. And then there was 12, which is not in this was not embedded in the sustainability plan itself, or but it was related to a density bonus. I would not recommend including this one because this was very specific to a zoning GDP density issue. So maybe just focusing on 7, 8, and 9.
Great. Thank you very much. Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, is it okay if I move away from sustainability? I just wanted to ask a question about our requirements, just to kind of cover all of our bases, our requirements following state and federal laws, because I did see a member of the public brought up the question about the Army Corps of Engineers exemption letter that was given, but it was given with a reason that wasn't really an allowable exemption under the Clean Water Act. There was in the stormwater management plan, there were attached some emails, and one of the emails from the Army Corps of Engineers staff said that it was basically too much trouble to coordinate with SHPA, and that they were going to issue an exemption to this as an irrigation ditch. And so I feel like this falls on the shoulders clearly of the Army Corps of Engineer employee who's improperly issuing an exemption. But then that was passed on to ERO, the consultant, and then passed on to the applicant and through to us. But I just want to make sure that there's not any burden to the city of not complying with the Clean Water Act that we would be concerned about.
So I'm not going to speak to the email back and forth. I think the city's standard is that they need to provide a compliance letter, and they've provided a compliance letter, and that's all we would ask from a city staff standpoint. If I can't speak to eligibility. I'm not an expert in that field. I don't work for the Army Corps of Engineers, so I can't say what their regulations are, how you qualify. But there is a letter in the packet that shows that they're exempt from the permitting requirement.
Can I just follow up? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just to follow up, the letter in the packet that is from the Army Corps of Engineers says that it is based on information provided by ERO. It doesn't say it's based on, so they're putting the burden of their exemption on information provided from ERO. But ERO did not say this is an irrigation ditch. ERO said this is a water of the United States that requires a permit under the Clean Water Act. But then they got the exemption letter. And now we have the exemption letter before us. And I'm just concerned that, if there were this is enforced, the Clean Water Act is enforced by EPA. So if this should be enforced, would there be, I'm not going to ask the same question, but I guess I'm concerned it would be a burden on the city. If we are to see that in front, and now that that's been presented to us, it's a false exemption.
So if there was an issue with their exemption, then would there be an issue for the city? Not that I'm aware of. They provided us the document that would be required to show an exemption. If there's something not legitimate about that, I don't think there's any, liability to the city. We've gotten the document, that we would probably want in this. And so let's say also that they have to get a permit. Well, then they would have to get a permit. And that could take place when they're actually developing. So I think the question at hand for the commission is, there's a ditch that's being relocated, and, you know, and it's being piped. And so does the commission feel like the design and piping of the ditch in relation to the subdivision, is that okay? And then it's really up to the applicant to comply with federal law. It's not up to the city to make sure they comply with federal law. So if the commission feels like the design, location of the ditch makes sense from our criteria, I would recommend focusing on that.
Thank you.
And then it would be fair to say, I think we have a condition that says the project must comply with all federal, state, and local laws, and this would be captured in that. They're not going to be able to, this development would not be able to move 1 inch of dirt if it didn't have the proper permitting.
Right, and I don't think it's really the city's, I mean, the city can't, you know,
Right.
make sure and enforce every state and federal law that an
Right.
applicant might have to comply with in the
Right.
course of development.
Yep.
Additional questions for staff? Last chance. Nothing? All right. All right. I will now close the public hearing, and the planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence that has been presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. And I think if we can kind of self-organize around certain topics so that we can kind of keep our thoughts as focused as possible to kind of better feed off of each other, I think that'll work out well. Who would like to begin?
I would be willing to start a little discussion about the open space issues associated with the proposal. And one thing I would do too is, well, first off, I would just thank everybody for providing their comments. It's been fantastic to hear from everybody here. I also need to thank staff. I mean, we rely on the planning staff to help us and guide us through our application of the code to this proposal. And so, you know, that's the process that I sure rely on, and I'm thankful that we have the staff that we do. I really feel like they provide us with the amount or the appropriate information for us to make a decision on this document. So I just wanted to share that. So in terms of open space, I should be fully transparent. I was the First City's open space coordinator here. I have a really good understanding of the work that the open space staff do, and I continue to have a very profound appreciation of the current staff and the fantastic program they've created. And this respect also extends to the Open Space Advisory Board. I find nothing in the record for this application proposal that suggests that staff or OSAB feel that they've acted inappropriately or without fully understanding the application and all the materials before us. I've not seen anything in the record that says otherwise. I read their comments and the minutes of their meetings especially closely, and I support their recommendations. For this application, I've been primarily focused on how open space within the development will enhance this area as a rural district, and less about how it will impact the region outside our city limits and outside our comp plan boundary. I'm looking to see that the public dedication is usable, shapes the development for this rural district, and meets the dedication requirement. I'm in agreement with staff and OSAB about this. This proposal meets the required open space dedication. Additionally, we heard extensive comments about requiring more open space. Our current comprehensive plan directly describes this parcel and provides clear direction for its development. It's a rural district, and it is not designated as open space. To now hold a landowner to a standard 4 times our open space dedication requirement is, to me, also becoming approaching what would become a modification of the comprehensive plan. And so what I would say is, if we as a town want the entire northern portion of this site preserved as open space, we would need to revise the comp plan for the parcel. And just as an aside, about a decade ago, OSAB made a recommendation to have more of the property acquired for open space. And at the time, it was not supported by our city's elected officials. One other item I think is really important for us to understand is, in the wake of the fire, we have an open space program that has had a lot of demands put upon the management of the property that it takes care of. A lot. People are asking a lot of management on that open space. And I pay a lot of attention to what the open space staff says when the amount of open space suggested in this proposal is adequate. I really would worry that we would overextend our open space management capabilities if we were to acquire more open space than what they've recommended for this development. So that's my take on the open space aspect of the proposal. Those are the kinds of things I've been thinking about anyway.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the possibility of trying to make some of the recommendations become requirements earlier.
With
As a
respect to
condition?
with respect
to the reports.
Yes, I would like to see us. Take the ERO recommendations in those wildlife plans. I would like to see those made part of the commitments of record and I would like to recommend that as a condition of approval if that's what we move forward with.
All right. Other thoughts, questions regarding open space? Commissioner Osterman.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Moline, for your opinions.
A little closer to the microphone.
Yeah. So I guess just a few points that I wanted to make in response. I appreciate that they're meeting and exceeding the 15% requirement. I guess where I'm just getting caught up is the portion of the code that relates to preserving and enhancing to the extent reasonable, the topography, the natural environment. And so where I am having challenges is related to the grading of the open space and the environmental consequences that would come with disturbing the natural environment. So I don't really know how to reconcile that.
I guess one thing I would offer is that, so for example, on the Harney-Listoka open space, when open spaces are surrounded by urbanized development or impervious areas, they're going to be subject to additional stormwater flows. And so some of the grading in the open space is intended to protect the open space from those potential increases in stormwater flows. So there's some grading there. I agree. I'm not. I would prefer that the dedicated open space that comes to us is not graded. So I agree. I completely agree with that perspective. I think your other point about natural features, we heard a lot of comments about natural features, vegetation, and trees on the site. And I guess I look at this as a site that's kind of split between brownfield and greenfield development. The brownfield area is definitely being redeveloped here, but it does spill into some more greenfield area. These, when you look at the wetland reports, when you look at the vegetation reports that were provided in the application, this is an area that is not, it's not pristine. It was farmed previously. It has, it's composed of introduced grasses. Yes, I would love to see those areas protected. I also don't, if we are going to move to a place where we interpret the code such that the development can't disturb any vegetation or any trees, we're going to be then it seems like it would become really challenging to allow any more development in the town, and maybe that's where we're headed. I don't know. Yeah.
Any additional thoughts on open space?
Yeah, I had a big seminar presented, but it was an overview, so now I have to cut and paste into the open space here. I want to build on some of the previous remarks and the achievements. I think I just want to start with some of the achievements that we've made to this point, and then I'm going to get to the open space thoughts. First of all, I want to thank the city planning department and the presentation, not only this one, but ones in the past. I know it's taken an incredible amount of time, so thank you for that. Thank you to the proposal for Brubacher and Jay Hardy. And then also really the citizen involvement and feedback. This has been really valuable for my deliberations, and I've read all of the comments from day one, so I really do appreciate all of that. I do appreciate the sustainability commitments that we've received and the additional information since the last visit. I'm sure there was a lot of time put into that. I think that one of the achievements that this could would be supporting a city's hospital, the city's hospital and new home. I think that one of the achievements is that we've had more constructive discussions between Brubacher and the city and the citizens. I think we're getting more constructive over time. I liked Brubacher's vision of the rolling hills and the open space between the sustainable buildings and the connectivity of open space and trails. So I want to start with all those achievements first, because I think that's a very good bouncing point. Now, to limit my discussion on the open space, the comp plan, as we all know, is from 2010. Am I correct? 2013. I read the whole thing. Unfortunately, it became fuel for the fire, so I don't have any more. But I do remember that the top 5 priorities, 2 of the top 5 priorities were open space and parks. And now that was back then when it was created. We've seen an increased population in Boulder County, and that is placing more demands on smaller amounts of open space. There's almost an imbalance. When I first moved here in 2002, the trails were pristine. You could go and get lost on a trail and not see, and of course everyone has seen that change, right? So there's an increased demand in open space, and I expect that to continue. I don't think that's going to get better. So I do believe that there's an argument to maintain that balance and maintain that that structure between growth and development and open space. And I think that this proposal gives us the opportunity to do that. I think that's one of the main points that I would argue is that that northern part of the parcel has some value to it, has some natural vegetation, and I would like to carve more of that out. If I could take a green highlighter and add to that map, I would add more of that, and I would change some of the road to create different, and I don't know what the answer to these things are, but regarding the road, but create a better traffic, and that leads into a different topic, I understand, pattern to preserve a little bit more of the open space and maybe add to it. But in regards to whether we think we need more open space or not, I do think we need to carve out a decent amount of open space to maintain that lifestyle that we all like, as well as maintain that growth and development versus open space.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
Go ahead and respond.
All right.
All right.
Commissioner Vance.
I also think, I want to start out by saying thanks to the staff and thanks to the applicant for continually providing us with more information. And I just had it in my mind that I just wanted to acknowledge all the members of the public who came out on August 11th and didn't get to speak, and then came out again on September 8th and spoke up, and then for coming back tonight. I see some of the same faces, and I really appreciate that. I also I'm a numbers person, and I counted up all the letters that we received, and I just wanted to say that I was surprised we had 184 letters on this application altogether, including those 99 of which came to Parks and Open Space. 162 of those were asking us to deny the subdivision plat, 19 were asking us to approve it, and 3 had different issues. I just wanted to point that out because it's a large number of letters, and people really took the time to write detailed letters, and I just, being new on the commission, feel bad that we can't respond to every issue that was raised, but hopefully you get to hear a lot of things answered as we go along. I'm sorry, now I wanted to move back to open space. I'm really glad you brought that up. Just to be clear, I think that it would be preferable to have all of the land north of Disc Drive and possible to remain as open space to provide a good buffer for the high school and to preserve, and I think that it can be done legally, because we do have the code that says that natural features, historical and archaeological sites should be preserved to the extent possible. And I do believe it's possible because we can see from the PUD from ConocoPhillips that they were able to include 2.5 million square feet on just about 150 acres of a footprint. I know they had some height allowances, but I do, I think we could be open to that at the PUD phase, but I do believe that the development could be significantly condensed on this area. And I wouldn't mind going on a little bit about what I think those natural features are. And I think that something that's really important in that northern part is that we have, if we look at the prairie dog management plan, we have 3 large healthy prairie dog towns. I guess I'm not personally familiar with how healthy they are, excuse me. But the one on the north seems to be the most healthy one, and that is a topographical feature, and that's something that so many other species depend upon. And we are right next to the Hodgkin-Harris Reservoir, which has thousands of bird species, and the Carolyn Homburg Preserve, 1,000 acres at Rock Creek Farm, where we know that the raptors visit this area. So I believe that, I think it would be really important to preserve that portion, and you just can't do it. You just can't shrink it down that small and have it be a viable colony. So I'm just wondering if we could push what's possible a little bit more.
Additional thoughts? So I guess I'm torn. Part of me wishes that the city had bought the property a long time ago, and we didn't have to have this conversation this evening, and that it was no, I wish it was a kind of a county-city combination along with Broomfield County too while we're at it, so we didn't have to bear the whole cost of it. But and yet on the other hand, when we think of sustainability too, part of what we have to look at is the location of the land, and knowing that it's never, for a long time, right? It's been agricultural for a long time before it was storage tech. Knowing that it's not considered a high value, this is technical terms, right? High value ecological area, that then we have this decision whether our human developments are in our backyard or whether we push them out further to Erie, further to Dacono, further east of I-25, and whether that really actually serves us well from a sustainability perspective, from single occupancy vehicle trips, and whether we are better off in having this is not dense by any means, development. So there's a trade-off. Trying to kind of build more open space into it may come at costs that we aren't really taking into account. So something to think about. Commissioner Krantz?
So just maybe if I could clarify just for a second too, I would not be, I would be supportive of additional open space. But there's 2 things that make me hesitate. One is following the code. I don't think requiring more open space in this instance is following the code. So that's my concern there. The comp plan shows this parcel, all of it, as rural district, not any of it is open space. So, I mean, like I said, I wish there was a way to do that, but I also feel like people are, we need to be following the code to the letter here. So, so that's where I'm landing there. The other thing that is compelling to me is when our Open Space Advisory Board and our staff are saying that they approve the proposal. So it's those kinds of things that lead me to be supportive of the current proposal with respect to open space. So.
Additional thoughts on open space? Commissioner Krantz?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think that I wanted to address first something that Chair Brown and I said about moving the development further. I think that I want to make sure I was clear why I wasn't proposing necessarily a reduction in density or removing the development. I was just simply saying we needed more open space and we could condense the development so it wouldn't necessarily push it out to further areas. And then just to respond to Commissioner Moline, I think that we wouldn't have a problem. I fairly strongly feel that we need more open space, and especially in this area. And the need for additional open space has to be based on the following factors: the city's comprehensive plan, topography, drainage, vegetation, and other physical conditions, and the type and density of the proposed development. I think that within these, I feel like we could work out a justification. And that's where we differ, I guess. Should we go into those in a little bit more detail?
Well, I don't know, that and then, again, I'm for me, it's a concern about adding acreage to our open space program when, again, they are already, we as a community that is recovering from fire and has had community members look at the open space program and say, you need to do more management of our current open space. I'm listening to their recommendations, all ears. That's it.
Mm-hmm. And
Thank you.
yeah.
Additional open space thoughts? We can always, if something comes up while we're discussing other topics, we can come back to it. But
Okay.
was there something specific for now?
Okay, now I think it, we'll come back to it if we need to. I would like to, I think that one of the big issues for me is whether or not this complies with the general development plan, the ConocoPhillips general development plan. But I'm interested in other issues that you think are, that are just as important, traffic or whatever.
Why don't we open that one?
Yeah, there's 5 areas that I have concern about, and we talked about topography a little bit. One of them, the next one is traffic, and as I mentioned through listening to the proposal, it just seems to me like we're setting ourselves up for failure when we have a failed plan that's going to be failed in 2027, meaning traffic will be more congested. And so if we're going to follow the code to the T, well, we look at the municipal code 16.04.020 B and K, and I'll just read it. To provide for the proper arrangement of streets in relation to existing or planned streets, and to provide for the safe and efficient circulation of traffic throughout the city, the avoidance of congestion in the streets and highways and along pedestrian and bikeways. And then part K is to provide for the safe and efficient circulation of traffic through the city, the avoidance of congestion in the streets. It just seems to me that the layout that they have right now, I don't think that they've gone, I think there's other options. And I think if we look at creatively, we can find different solutions. I don't think we need to table any of our progress, but it seems to me like there are other intersections we could look at that would not only preserve open space or group the open space together, but also redirect traffic to maintain safety and reduce congestion.
So just, thanks, commissioners. So it gets challenging because as the applicant explained, for example, some of their traffic depends on both county, city, other entities and approval of those sorts of things. And so we have a proposal before us. Do we have, I mean, I feel like we would have to make some really sort of concrete, and maybe, and we should, if we have really good concrete thoughts about how we would improve it. You know, like, I guess I'm sort of asking, what would we suggest? Or what would you propose?
Well, I'm not, as I said, I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not an engineer that can make that decision.
Yeah.
What I do know is that we're trying to fit a square box into a round hole here.
Yeah.
The whole idea is to make the area safer and less congested.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this necessarily does either one of those two things.
Okay.
So when we look at the code, I'm wondering, are we sufficing that code?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're achieving our goals on the traffic.
Okay.
I can't say exactly what I have some ideas. I'm happy to sit down with someone, but when I sit here, I'm not gonna
Yeah,
tell you those ideas because I
that's
just
true.
don't know whether it's valuable for everybody's time.
And you're right. I mean, if you feel that the proposal isn't meeting the criteria, then it shouldn't. Then it's not meeting it.
I guess I'm at a point where the city and the county traffic people have essentially signed off on this as the best solution. Boulder Valley School District involved there also, right? So I haven't heard any. We know that there'll be increased traffic, no matter anytime something is built, right? That's going to be successful. There's going to be increased traffic. While it would be nice to think that there's kind of a zero-sum game where somehow we could make traffic go away with the proposal, with some projects, I don't know that we're ever going to make it go away. So I'm not sure what we're aiming for at that point.
I just think the proximity of the entry into the off of 96th and campus is really close to the E470 and what I call Highway 42. Yeah.
Right.
It seems like that proximity is, there's going to be a lot of backup and congestion in that area. And you not only talk about congestion of traffic, you talk about safety and concerns, and are you opening yourself up to more accidents and other things, you know, fire vehicles and ambulances and stuff coming through there. And, you know, I have high schoolers myself. The safety factor of high schoolers coming in and out of there. Is that a valid exit and entryway in case of emergency?
And I guess what I would say, Commissioner Howe, is if we have the studies and the traffic engineers and our city engineers and our city planners reviewing those and saying that they are safe and going to function, those kind of testimonies are compelling too.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to say whether or not they're actually, I mean, they're saying that they're functioning, but they will fail in, that the C470 intersection will fail in 2027 to 2028, and that,
Right.
And it did seem like there's a 95% confidence interval that we won't have traffic from Campus Drive backing up beyond C470 and 96, but then 5% of the time that you will be waiting, you'll be waiting in a light, but you can't move forward because of that. So that does seem problematic. So I'm not sure if the engineers were concluding that this was a perfect solution.
Right.
Well, but I think what that points to then is then it needs to be re-engineered.
Right.
Right. Ultimately.
And that we're going to reach those, you know, some of those thresholds we reach whether this is approved or not. You know, there's just that's one of the things that the city's transportation study showed. There's a lot of traffic that moves just through the city, and we don't have, I mean, that's something that the city has to contend with and can work through, but there's a lot of traffic that moves through the city and around the city that doesn't originate or begin here, that also plays into these, yeah.
To me, the traffic studies also, they kind of provide a work plan, right? So that we know what's gonna, you know, on paper, what's gonna fail when, so then it's incumbent upon all the different entities to work together to meet that, to meet those issues, ideally before they arise. We don't usually build the freeways long before we need them. We would all freak out, and that's not the goal. So in this case, on some of these intersections, we know what we're up against, and we need to make that priority. And so at that point, then, council needs to direct work such that all the other entities involved, the Tollway Authority and Northwest Parkway Authority and Broomfield and the IGA signatories and all those different people have to work together on some of these other issues.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, please, yeah.
In some ways, that is the way that things are often done, but it doesn't seem like, it seems like that's a failure all over the world of waiting till we have the problem. And I do think that there are ways, I mean, if the criteria, I'm not sure that this is like, you know, that there's not wiggle room in this criteria, but the criteria in the comprehensive plan that Commissioner Howe mentioned, that we not cause a conflict with traffic. If we wanted to deny the application based on traffic, maybe we have to look at what is the actual problem here. Can we have 20,000 additional cars to this area? We can reduce some of that through the traffic demand management. But even with their goal of 25%, that's not going to do much. So I would propose, I mean, I'm not really proposing, but I'm saying that there's other possibilities out there that have not been considered. For example, the traffic demand management plan doesn't include limitations on parking. Our previous GDP did. You know, and it's not a pedestrian-oriented development. It's not a comprehensive, cohesive development. And if we clustered it more, there would be a lot less car traffic driving around within the development. And I also think that we could, I mean, if it doesn't meet, this probably won't be very popular, but if we can't accommodate 20,000 cars and the traffic demand management plan, even with its most aggressive goals, can't do it, then it could be possible that we have to, you know, limit the density of the development further to, let's say, 1 point, like to what it was at Storage Tech. I mean, I don't know what it would be, but we need to, if we're saying we can't accommodate 20,000 cars, even with the traffic demand management, we need to evaluate whether or not that meets the criteria in the comprehensive plan and other criteria that are in our code.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Commissioner Kritz? So when I need to help understand where you're coming from. So when you're saying that we're not meeting the ability to accommodate 20,000 car trips, but the traffic studies are showing that it can be accomplished, and then there are these things, there are going to be these bottleneck points at some point in the future that need to be addressed that are not entirely within the developer's ability to address. I'm just, it's a challenge.
Thank you, because it is a fine line, because when is the life, safety, and health and welfare of the people of Louisville? How do you define that? And sitting in traffic is one of the things that people have problems with.
Sure.
And I'm just not sure like how we can relate that to the code. And I think it was a really great place to start to talk about how that fits in with the comprehensive plan core value that we were talking about.
Yeah, and my challenge for me is when we have traffic materials that have been submitted that can show how it can work. So, and have it work in a safe manner. So
I guess I just want to ask where
Please.
you're getting that information. So the LOS, I'm just reading here, is a qualitative measure used to relate the quality of motor vehicle service, used to analyze roadways and intersections by categorizing traffic flow. They did that study, and you keep saying that the study said that everything's fine. But let me read the study to you.
Yeah.
Because it's not. So let me read that.
Yeah.
It says, the traffic analysis memo and traffic and mobility study, they've studied this.
Yes.
With the August 11, 2022 packet, note that the Northwest Parkway US 36 interchange, and that's just that intersection.
Yep.
They're
Yep.
not doing any other.
Right.
Because they haven't gotten the agreement from the Northwest
Right.
Parkway yet. So they haven't agreed to that. Will reach an LOS of F in 2040 based on background traffic. So they have studied this, background traffic alone. And with background traffic and traffic from the proposed development, the interchange would have an LOS of F sooner and need capacity expansion in the 2027, 2028 timeline. So they have studied this, and they have found that it's no bueno. This is not good starting in 2027.
Right. I totally agree with you.
Let me go one step further. The interchange is within the jurisdiction of CDOT and the city and county of Broomfield. And the staff is not aware of any current, this is off their radar.
Yeah.
Or future plans for expansion of the interchange at this time. So when we say they should be prepared for this.
Right, yeah.
And they should be planning.
Right.
But they're not, and we know it's gonna fail. So it's hard for me to say, yep, we're good, we're gonna move forward, when we know that it's not good. That's my thought.
I really appreciate that, Commissioner, how you, and I am aware of that. I think I guess maybe the point I would make is, at this point, but you bring up a really good comment. I mean, that's great. So thank you for
But
clarifying
I
that.
think, to me, thank you for reading it also, but to me, what that points to is, we know there's a problem out there, we need to solve it.
Yeah.
Right, and so, at that point, it's an incumbent upon the city of Louisville to perhaps spearhead that effort with all the other entities, because it's gonna fail no matter what.
Or not create the problem in the first place.
Well, no, the problem, it's
In
gonna fail
2040.
no matter what.
In 2040,
Right,
and that
so-
gives us
Right.
18 years.
So, but we don't really have an option of not creating the problem when this area is zoned and comp plan addresses it also, right? I mean, we can bounce back to the comp plan too. The comp plan actually calls for what is essentially, right, in the big picture level, being proposed on a certain level. So, it's a traffic issue, it needs to be addressed.
And I just broadened the scope here of our discussion, because I think that's a good point. Yeah. I think that that's a good point. Are we trying to make things better, or are we just trying to plug the hole? And when I look up there, I sat over there last time, and I was able to see our mission. I just want to read aloud. Our commitment is to protect, preserve, and enhance the quality of life in our community. I'm not saying that the solution's not out there, and I want to find that solution. But when I read things like that, I'm not sure if we're enhancing what we've got. I don't think we're improving what we've got. We're making things worse. And the rationale is that we were going from a 2040 to a 2027 timeline there.
Thanks.
I'm gonna make sure I get but I guess one of the things I would,
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I still struggle with those same issues, Commissioner Howe. And I mean, I recall some of the comments I made the first time we saw this initial application when it was very large, and a lot of those concerns, the climate change impacts, the traffic. Something that we haven't spoken very much about tonight is jobs housing balance, and what does this do to our community? And those things remain a big concern of mine. And as we've talked about, and we heard great public comment about, we also have to follow the code. And so when I follow the code, look at our mission. I don't know, we might have some differences on how we view those things, so, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Grants.
I wanted to point out something in our code that might seem a little bit nitpicky, but in searching for.
Oh, your microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I just lost what I was gonna, lost it. Let me just pull up the right thing. Thank you. In the code with the many purpose statements for a subdivision plat, I just wanted to point out that letter K says to provide the safe and efficient circulation of traffic throughout the city, the avoidance of congestion in the streets and highways. And that is one of the purpose statements that it says that we are to evaluate whether or not this subdivision plat complies with all of the purposes included in Title 16. And that is, so if we were looking for a code way to require improvements in the traffic.
Exactly, and then the kind of other way to look at it is in our transportation master plan, connecting Campus Drive is one of the goals of that plan. Here's a development that's proposing to do that, and trying to address some of those existing traffic concerns.
And I love the idea of that you brought up the transportation master plan, because I think it's really important to mesh these two things.
Yeah.
That has a goal of just trying to push this development a little bit away from 20,000 vehicles, maybe down to like what storage check was projected. I don't remember the number, but if we're just trying to reduce the amount of traffic.
Yeah.
Our transportation master plan has a lot more tools than their traffic demand management plan, so it might be worth looking into that more deeply.
For sure.
And their goal is to have 35% single occupancy vehicles by 2030, and I think that might be something we want to ask for from this development.
Absolutely.
All right, traffic, anything additional on traffic, or are we, and there may be some conditions there that somebody wants to at least be able to kind of clarify for staff at some point. Does anybody have a condition on the fly that they wanted to ask for? All right.
Well, I think one condition would be the approval letter from the Northwest Parkway. At some point, that's going to be needed.
Yeah.
They got the approval from BVSD, but not the Northwest Parkway yet.
Commissioner Krantz?
And I'll add my condition that I probably won't be very popular, but reducing the density to 1.6 million square feet would do a lot to solve the problem.
Well, we'd probably be better suited to just deny
At that point.
It's the proposal, that would be, we have the proposal in front of us. I think we would need to react to that.
Okay. I wanted to put it out there as a way of making things work.
Okay.
But to make things work. But there is a condition in the Planned Community Zone District Agreement that says that the applicant understands, or this signatory understands, that the maximum density may not be the same as the allowed density.
Yes.
So there is a mechanism for that.
Yep.
Any additional overarching topics?
Mine were topography, traffic, infrastructure, economic benefit, and sustainability. So I maybe would pick one of those other ones.
So is topography different than open
Topography
space?
we already talked about. I think that was already maybe discussed.
All right. So what else is in there we haven't discussed? So
Infrastructure, I think that
okay.
it seems to me like there's a lot of open-ended questions there. One of the elephants in the room is water, and how can we reuse that? That's obviously a.
What are you thinking we could reuse?
Well, there are gray water lines in the city. I'm not a water engineer. But there are, water is definitely less and less plentiful, and I think the reuse of it is more and more important. And there'll definitely be irrigation requirements for this proposal. And the city does have existing gray water lines, which we heard them talk about and say that it is going to be cost prohibitive to do that. That'd be interesting to know. Could that be extended from the Coal Creek golf course? Would that be recommended? I know from the developer side they said, but it just seems like there's some questions that I would still have for infrastructure. I mean, we could just keep going on and on with questions, and the details aren't there. Sewer would be another one.
Why don't we talk water really quickly here? Commissioner Mobley, did you have-
Well, again, I mean, I guess I trust in our public works staff that they review all of these documents, that they are able to forecast that they're going to be able to provide. If they are not confident that we're going to be able to serve this development with water or sewer capacity, I guess, I mean, I have every trust in our staff that we would know that. So it's hard for me to anticipate that we, yeah.
I'm also there, so there's gray water is a technical term, and I think probably what you're referring to more is maybe raw water, ditch water. And the issue of water rights is really what comes up at that point. I'm hearing that there really isn't any extra water. So I think maybe you're referring like purple pipe water, which is adjacent to the property in Broomfield, but not available to this project. So while yeah, water is a huge issue.
You probably know more about it than I do, but when I was on the parks and public landscaping, we talked at length about this, and from what I understand is there's purified water, and then there's water that you wouldn't drink, maybe would be in a toilet, and that would be considered gray water, water that could be cycled and be used. And so that's why they have those signs up at the, maybe that's what you're alluding to with the purple.
Pipe, yeah, right.
So maybe we're thinking the same thing. I've heard it alluded to or represented as gray water from the planning of the parks group. That's why they have all the signs out, right? Don't drink the water. You know, you talk about sustainability, and then this leads into the sustainability portion of my concerns, which is they're still a little bit loose, and maybe we could tie that down a little bit. And when we talk about conditions, our conditions are getting longer and longer and longer. There's a lot of details that we don't have. So, for example, could we reuse some water for irrigation? Would that be wise? You know, in 30, 40 years, we're going to be looking back on this and saying, hey, do we really think about everything? Should we just let these details go and let someone else figure it out? And I guess it's just a different approach. You know, my approach as a planner and a commissioner is, man, I'd like to get all of these details all figured out. And that's what I evaluate. It's hard for me to say, well, someone else is going to, or city council is going to ask those questions. I'd rather ask questions here and get that worked out. So that would be one of them would be, could we reuse water? In 30, 40 years, I think that's going to be an important question that we should have asked.
So when you say, could we reuse water, are you proposing, so I think the water that leaves the water treatment plant is not available for reuse at this point in time, is my understanding of it, right? That they're required to release it. That if we had an infrastructure in place, that water is not ours necessarily.
I think water is reused for watering the golf course at this point and community park. So there is some infrastructure for what they would consider purple or this gray water use. But that was not, it seemed like it was cost prohibitive, which I can understand from a developer's perspective. However, looking down the road, that may be valuable a discussion to have.
Additional thoughts on water, maybe we can seg into sewer at that point too. So my understanding with sewer, right, is that it is planned, right? And it's planned, the expansion at our sewer treatment plant is planned. Louder, thanks, yeah. So that the sewer is planned and that the expansion at the sewer treatment plant will be paid for by the development.
I think that seems to be a little bit more well thought out.
Any additional umbrella areas of concern in that list you had? Was there?
I guess that leads to sustainability. What were your concerns about building sustainability and requirements for building?
So I think if we were to go back and I think City Council will be looking at these too. And I would suggest that the additional stipulations 7 and 9 be included. The solar one, I think, has been addressed in the current language. I can only hope that it'll go far beyond what's been proposed, actually. I think it may be cost effective, so we may end up seeing more solar at some point out there anyway. But the other two stipulations regarding the buildings, I would suggest we could build that as a condition related to this. Any other thoughts on that?
You're talking about the all-electric HVAC to all, and heating for all office buildings and for industrial buildings, but not for processes.
Right.
Thank you.
Any additional thoughts for deliberation? Keep it wide open here.
I know that we're not going to go point by point through all the code sections, but I have some concerns about the modification requests that were in the letter, the cover letter for this application. And I had some questions concerning whether or not this complies with the GDP. I'm just giving you my list here. And I had some questions about whether it complies with certain specific codes in the subdivision title. And so if anybody wanted to start with any of those, I have some concerns about those things.
I guess again I rely on the city attorney to provide us with guidance as to whether our deliberations are legal, as to whether we're addressing what needs to be addressed by law within that. So we've gotten the green light from the city attorney to take into account this proposal, as has the proposal in the past. So the fact that the history, in particular on this plot of land, had gone through to the point that it got in the past, I'm not as concerned about those issues, but
okay.
Welcome your discussion on it.
Can I, just to be
Please.
really brief though, I do fully feel like it's our obligation to vet this against the ConocoPhillips GDP because that's one of the applicable zoning documents that we need to vet it against. And the GDP has 4 major purposes. One is well, first of all, the reason I had asked for those code sections from Title 17 was the purpose of a planned community zone district is to provide a coordinated community design and to allow for contemporary planning principles. So I think that it's a little bit problematic that we're using it's unusual, I should say, not necessarily problematic, that we're using a general development plan that's 12 years old. And so when I'm vetting the subdivision plat before us against this very brief, simplistic, I understand why it's simplistic, general development plan, I do see some issues in some of the major points of a GDP. And one of those, like the 4 of them I wanted to talk about, one of them is the type and character of development, the location of open space, I think we've already talked about that, and the roads. A general development plan is supposed to establish where the roads go. And it was clear that, this is like just one of the big issues I have. It's clear that this general development plan had private roads, and now we're considering public roads. And I think that if we're changing something with the roads, that we need to consider whether or not this requires a general development plan amendment, because that's one of the major components of a general development plan. And our code does say that this shall substantially comply with the GDP. So I think that the roads is a major thing. We're changing the location of Campus Drive from what was originally proposed, and we're also changing from private to public. So I think that's a concern of mine about whether or not this complies. The second part of whether or not it complies with this, with the general development plan would be the type and character of development, because on the GDP, in many places, we've got language alluding that this is a single-user corporate campus, with the word campus, with the employee-oriented restaurants. And I know that there is a way to interpret really broadly, but I also think that we have to look at the type and character of a flex industrial, retail, hospital campus. If we're changing the type and character of development, I would recommend that we suggest we'd be better off with a GDP amendment rather than trying to fit this into the ConocoPhillips GDP, which is going to lead us to problems in interpretation down the road. Sorry for being so long. I was thinking about this a lot.
And so what would that mechanism be to amend the GDP? How would you see that? How would you?
I thought we were close to what we had, something similar to what we had in September. Not necessarily that amendment, but an amendment that lays out what the uses are going to be, what the type and character of development is, and how the roads are integrated into our city road network. That's what a GDP is supposed to do. And I'm just not sure that, I'm not sure that this subdivision plat is meeting those things.
I guess the part where I'm not following you, Commissioner Krantz, is that, so the landowner has an approved GDP.
Yes.
So now what we're trying to do, amending that.
Amending the GDP, doing a GDP amendment might be more, I just don't know that this subdivision plat, I think the question that we have to answer is, does this subdivision plat comply with the GDP?
Right.
And if the answer is no, then then it would require either changing the subdivision plat or requiring a GDP amendment to make it fit. So I'm just asking the question, does this fit? Does this comply with the GDP that's before us?
And you're asking.
I'm asking. I wanted to deliberate on that.
Oh yeah. So can I ask what your perspective is?
Thank you for your patience with me. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. My perspective was that we've had a change in the roads, and we've had a change in the type and character of development, and we've had a change in the uses, which are three of the main things that the GDP is asking for. So I'm feeling like it's stretching the intent of the ConocoPhillips GDP too far.
So for the road, for the Campus Drive aspect, from the applicant's perspective, they're saying we had to move it partly because they had to meet the intent of some of the, and so what you're saying is that, so therefore it has to be amended?
Kind of, yeah.
Responded to our.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's the kind of thing that would require, we've had GDP, you've been doing this longer than me, but haven't we had GDP amendments for a lot smaller issues than moving a 4-lane road?
Yeah, I guess generally they're going to come from the person that owns the landowner. They're going to come as a proposal to amend it from the landowner themselves. We'd have to ask the applicant if they would be amenable to that, I guess.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting more that we look. I'm just asking. I'm just asking. Does this comply? Does this subdivision plat? If we change the road, does it comply? And I think that might be something we have. Maybe it's something that we need to leave to City Council to bring up with the city attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I'm with it. In general, it does seem to comply in my reading of any number of stuff. So at that point, yeah, if legally it doesn't, then
Right.
then the city attorney and council need to get that straightened out.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we look at the plan as proposed, that's kind of what we're looking at, kind of more narrowly, I think, for me tonight at least. But.
Yeah, I'm just really glad to have this discussion, and I appreciate all the, I'm not in any way trying to be argumentative or anything. I'm just trying to hear what you're suggesting, and then and then when I'm hearing some things that seem complicated, I'm just pointing out it. I don't recall that we've, some of the stuff around the GDP amendment. So yeah, that's all. Yeah, this is a great discussion.
Yeah, no need to apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wanting to just trying to determine whether it complies with the code, and it doesn't sound like we have a clear agreement on that, but maybe we would be able to discuss the modifications for the subdivision plat criteria.
The block?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess for me on that, I'm supportive of staff's recommendation on that. And the reason I am is because this is a rural district. And again, I went to great lengths when we saw this the first time about the concerns that I have about this development pattern, the climate impacts of development. But the comprehensive plan designates this site as a rural district. It doesn't designate it as a downtown district with small blocks. And so yes, we absolutely want that kind of more pedestrian-oriented development. What's before us now is a subdivision that's asking for approval within the context of an old GDP and a 9-year-old comprehensive plan that has a rural district. If to me, to do a whole different, I'm not going to be able to come up with, but some of the categories in the comprehensive plan, but sort of the downtown development type. If we wanted to see that kind of development out at this property, we would need to change the comp plan.
And actually that issue of changing the comp plan was brought up when the proposal quite a long time ago included residential and mixed use and retail, and the community spoke out against that very clearly. And so that's why all of that's been excluded. Super blocks are horrible in an urban setting. This is not an urban setting, so.
So I
Or is
really don't want to, I'm sorry. I'll be really brief so Commissioner Osterman and Commissioner Howell can contribute to this part of the discussion if you both want to. My problem with my question, I guess I should say, with the super blocks is that it exceeds the maximum length and so in our code. And so a modification is asking for an exception. And one of the members of the public who spoke said that we have a very high bar for allowing a modification. And the modification, one of those things one of those hoops that we need to jump through is there no other alternative is there no other reasonable alternative available? And it seems like there is. You can make the blocks less than 1,350 feet long. I mean, that just seems like there is a reasonable alternative. And the reason these blocks are so large is in part because This is a very high-level plan, which is allowing to grade a really large area before, which makes it impossible, which might preclude our ability to plan things more, make a more coordinated plan later on. So there might be some benefits to following the code in this one. So I'm saying we may not meet that high bar for allowing this exemption from the code. Does anybody agree or disagree?
I mean, at this point, I don't have that much further comment on that issue in particular. It's a different animal out there of what works. If we were building an urban center or mixed-use development, yeah, no, that would be a giant issue. At this point, though, for what we have in front of us, to me, it's just not that big of an issue. Any other thoughts? I know it's getting late. I think we're at a point, though, where we're getting close to perhaps wrapping up our deliberations. I made some promises about ending this a little while ago. I apologize for not living up to that at this point in time. However, what are other pressing issues that other commissioners want to discuss at this time?
Well, if there's no one else that's going to talk, then I'll just take the mic, as I've already done tonight. And I'll just read the comments that I'd already made on paper, and it's brief. So indulge me for 2 minutes. I don't think we can make any mistake about it. The parcel of land we're discussing tonight is a gateway for Louisville, not only physically, but metaphorically into the future. We must evaluate this project through the windshield of today's land use needs and city codes, understanding that in 30 or 40 years, we'll judge today's decisions through our rear view mirror. This proposal has been difficult for me to evaluate because of its complexity, expansive nature, and at times ambiguity. And it feels like I've just taken a bite of a huge apple and it's hard to even chew it up. There's so many details and so many levels, preliminary, final plat, GDP, comprehensive plan. There's so many details on so many levels. It's complicated. The details of the road forward are still not clear to me regarding some of these things. Topography, traffic, infrastructure, sustainability. I mentioned some achievements, but there's still some concerns. I don't think it meets the section 1616.010 to protect the natural features, habitat, and trees. I don't think it meets section 16.04020 B and K and doesn't provide safe and efficient circulation of traffic and reducing congestion. We have a lot of assumptions. We assume that there's contractual agreements that are going to be met with Northwest Parkway. I would suggest we use this land to improve things. How do we improve our existing employment and housing imbalance with Louisville? I think that was a great point that you made, Commissioner Marlene. That's a complicated matter. And this, as the planning department supplied evidence to, will make this worse. How do we improve water usage? There's a lot of details that we haven't heard. How can we assume that the new buildings are net zero? Are we going to add conditions to all these things? And that the sustainability is adequate for the future? And how can we improve larger sustainability issues such as condensing the concrete, heat islands, reducing the amount of buildings and things? There's a lot of good things in this proposal, and we don't need to start back from square one. It is zoned as a rural district, and there are buildings that are meant to be there. I agree with that. But I think that we can creatively solve problems that maybe haven't been solved yet to make it even better. I don't want to add problems to our current existing problems through this proposal, which is why through the large number of conditions, I think we need to think this through a little bit further. I think we've made accomplishments and achievements, and we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
Commissioner Wiley?
Yeah, I just have help me, Commissioner, what's that mechanism for what's that mechanism? How do you propose that we would do that?
I think it's difficult. I think as a developer, myself, in different ways, you see the project and you make the project fit your needs. I think in this case, we need to step back and say, okay, these are the needs. We've heard from the citizens, we've heard from the Planning Commission, we've heard from all these people. How do we fit those needs into our development? So we need to see it from the other side too. How do we take this traffic study? All right, can we make it better? Is there a way we can make it better? For these open space desires, can we make this better? Can we carve out more of what the citizens need? Sustainability. Of course, we can create conditions and conditions and conditions. My feeling is that we're going to have a long list of conditions, and it's going to be laborious.
And so are you thinking of I'm just thinking logistics here, like continuing the meeting to develop that list of proposed conditions, or what? Yeah.
Yeah, I would listen to what you guys had to say about that, if there's any ideas.
Ultimately, per the script, we have a few basic options. Denial with conditions, or approval with conditions, approval, table, and, putting it off to a couple weeks from now. So as far as that mechanism, it looks at this point that we will vote this evening on it. So we don't have that many options, really, I think is what it comes down to, as far as how we can push this further, potentially, is my thought on that. So to answer your question, if that helps answer your question.
Could there be another mechanism? And I just throw this out there, and I need your feedback because I don't know the answer to this. If we did a preliminary plat approval, I'm not even sure we have the things that I would need in that preliminary plat. Then it would have to come back as a final plat.
I think the way it's written right now is that it's proposed to us as a preliminary and final. I don't think we can splice it on the fly. So our vote my understanding procedurally, has to be that we would have to deny the whole thing to reopen it. It would get different kind of worms. Any other current thoughts? How are people feeling? Any ideas you wanted to share with us?
Oops. Yeah, I don't know that I have any ideas for how to resolve some of the issues that have been raised.
All right.
But when you listed the options that we have to vote on right now, one of them was to table. Was that, did I hear that?
Yeah, that's
And that means.
that's a different one. That's not actually really applicable in this case.
Oh, okay.
Table is a different option. And at this point, yeah, that's not really something we can vote on. Commissioner Krantz.
With the long list, with the conditions being a little bit long, I wouldn't mind making a motion to deny.
Okay.
But I don't want to, is that okay? Well, procedurally, I could read the full thing out. I mean, I would like to entertain a motion to deny the preliminary and final plat, Red Toe Ridge to filing number 1 for a 389.10 acre property located northwest of US 36, Northwest Parkway, and southeast of South 88th Street Campus Drive, Resolution 13, Series 2022.
And do we have a second for that?
I would second.
And can we have a roll call vote, please? Director Zucchero? yes.
I'm going to intervene just on procedure. So I think typically if there's going to be a denial, we would bring back a resolution of denial with findings. So I would ask that there be consideration that it be changed to a motion to direct staff to draft a resolution of denial. I have notes, but if anybody wants to add reasons for denial based on the criteria that you want to make sure is added in the resolution, please let me know what those are also before you vote.
Well, before we vote,
Thank you. I'd like to propose a resolution to direct staff to draft a resolution of denial.
all right, do we have a second for that?
Do we have to vote on the previous motion? Point of
No,
order?
procedurally, this is the correct
Okay.
way to do it.
Okay.
So,
I take back the previous one. Thank you.
thank you, yes.
I would maybe just make a couple more comments before taking a vote, but I don't know, do you feel that's appropriate, or should we just move to the vote?
Well, the planning department was asking for comments
Yeah,
regarding
they
this
are.
motion.
But I am open. I did not mean to rush things.
Okay.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's
No,
okay.
I
You grabbed it.
I appreciate you making the motion. I guess I just wanted to again thank everybody for the comments that we've heard. Again, thank staff, and then I think everybody in this room wants what's best for our town. Everybody here, we all live here, we all want what's best for the town, and we're all just doing the best we can and trying to ensure that what's before us meets our code. And we just all have different ways of looking at that. So anyway, I've really appreciated the public's comment, and I've really appreciated our discussion here this evening. So thanks, everyone.
Additional comment? So I would kind of echo that too. We are, I think, all working for what we feel is best for our town and what's, been charted out by the town, given past history. And yet we're tasked with voting on it, so I welcome the vote. With that, then, would a roll call vote, please?
And was there a second on the new?
Yeah, Commissioner
I'll
Howe
second the
seconded.
motion if I didn't already.
Ready?
Can you
So
repeat
a
what
vote
we're doing?
yes
Is it-
Yeah.
is a vote no. So a vote yes right now is to say that you don't support the proposal.
Yeah, so the motion at hand is a vote to direct staff to prepare a resolution of denial for the application. So a vote of yes is a vote to bring back the resolution of denial. Okay. Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
Chair Brunice,
No.
Commissioner Moline,
No.
Commissioner Osterman.
Yes.
All right. Thank you all for your time. All right, with that then, we will move through the rest. Do we have any additional planning commission comments? Seeing none.
I guess I would just like to say, I would like to echo your comments. After listening to everything for the last few weeks, I finally was really excited to hear what you guys had to say. And I do appreciate and respect all of your thoughts. It's been a long journey listening to everyone, and we get to finally talk for just a moment, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
again, same with the public.
Thank you all. Staff comments.
Nothing major. We are planning on one public hearing for an application in October, as well as the work plan discussion.
Great.
So we'll plan to meet in
Thank you.
October.
Any additional comments from staff? No? All right, motion to adjourn. I'll move that. Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
We'll skip the second. Thank you all. Thank you. Good night.